and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's Talk of the Town. This is a special edition of Talk of the Town. Tonight we're going to be examining some of the issues that are going to confront you, the taxpayers, in the upcoming election. Now, this is sort of a special election for the town of Longmeadow because in the past we've always had bipartisan elections here in Longmeadow, and this is our first nonpartisan election. And the only office that you'll actually be voting for in this upcoming nonpartisan election, the primary, will be that of selectmen. Now, you will be voting for two candidates, and we have three candidates that are with us tonight to discuss some of the issues that will be confronting you. So remember, you can vote for two of these candidates in the upcoming election, February 14th. Now, with me tonight to help explore some of these issues, and I guess some people call this a debate, but I think I would call it a conversational political interreaction. I think debate sometimes has a harsh overtone. And to help me tonight in exploring some of these issues with you, we have two reporters. First of all, we have Julie Cotnoir, who is a reporter with the Longmeadow News and the in-print newspaper. Also with Julie tonight, who will be asking the questions, is Ford Turner. Ford is a reporter for the Springfield Union News covering the town of Longmeadow. Now, to introduce the three candidates for the review for this evening, we start from left to right. First of all, we have Ben Russell. Ben Russell is a graduate of Tufts University with a BA in English in 1972. He has a master's in business administration from Babson College. He moved to Longmeadow in 1981 with Spalding, and he's currently a partner in Graham Russell's sales company. It's based in Simsbury, Connecticut, which deals in marketing and sales in the sporting good industry. Ben has coached in the Little League for 3 years, soccer for 2 years, and is active in the First Church. He lives with his wife, Marcia, on Eton Road, and Ben and Marcia have 3 children. Next to Ben, we have Arlene Miller. Miss Miller has been a resident of Longmeadow for 11 years. She received her Bachelor of Science degree from Bowling Green State University and her Master's of Science degree from Ohio State University. She lives on East Greenwich Road with her husband David and their 2 children, Tracy, a senior at Longmeadow High, and Brad, a freshman. Mrs. Miller works as a homemaker and teaches part-time in the biology department at Holyoke Community College. Arlene Miller was elected to the Longmeadow Board of Selectmen in March of 1986. She is seeking her second term on the board. Since she has been a resident in Longmeadow, Mrs. Miller has been a soccer coach, served on the Adult Education Committee of the First Church, and has been the president of the Springfield Area League of Women Voters. Mrs. Miller presently is a member of the Longmeadow Recycling Commission, the PVTVA Advisory Board, co-president of the Longmeadow Social Daycare, among others. Next to Arlene is attorney Matthew J. King. Attorney King of 198 Edgewood Road in Longmeadow, where he has resided at that address for approximately the last 2.5 years. He is married to Eileen Kelleher, Eileen Kelleher King, formerly of the Forest Park area of Springfield, and has an 18-year-old son, Matthew Jr., and I can attest that his wife is expecting their second child in June, as I met her prior to going on the air. Attorney King is presently a trial attorney for the law firm of Fine, Pearson, you'll have to give me that, Emont and Fine. You'll have to realize, ladies and gentlemen, that I asked each one of these candidates to give me their opening credentials, and some of them wrote it, and their handwriting leaves somewhat to be desired. He is, Mr. King, or Attorney King, worked for 3 years as an assistant district attorney in Hampden County. Attorney King graduated with honors from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst in 1981 and graduated from Stetson University of Law in St. Petersburg, Florida in 1984. While in law school, Attorney King was the vice president of the school's moot court program and was an author with the Stetson Law Review. So these are the three candidates that are seeking the office of Selectman of Longmeadow, Massachusetts. Now, prior to going on the show, we draw straws to see who would go first in terms of making their opening statement. We'll have an opening statement for each one of these candidates, and after their opening statements, the reporters will go in a round-robin fashion and ask each one of these candidates various questions. Now, also, as you see on the screen right now, you are going to be allowed to call in and ask questions. And you see the number 567-9397. Now, one of the things that we do ask you when you do call in, this will not be an open-air question. In other words, the candidates will not be hearing it over the phone. Rather, there will be someone, Joyce Rosati, who will be taking your call. We'll be writing the question down. Now, in order for your call to be submitted on the air, we ask that you give your name and your address. And we ask that the calls that you do make are pertinent to the issues that are being explored this evening. If some of your questions have already been asked, or the reporters in reviewing them feel that they have already been asked, then they will not specifically be asked on the air, and we hope that you realize that and go along with the procedure that we've established for tonight's program. So without any further ado, as I said, we did draw straws, and Mrs. Miller drew the first straw, and she will be making her opening statement. Arlene?
Thank you, Tom. I'd like to make one correction. When you do vote on March 14th or February 14th in the preliminary election, you vote for one of us,
That's
and
right.
two people will survive the preliminary process and go on to the final election.
Two people will actually come out of the
right,
election.
but each person will only vote for
Right,
one
okay.
candidate. Just we wanted to be sure you understood that.
Okay.
So
And I hope you voters do too.
Thank you. It's been my privilege to be a member of the Board of Selectmen for the past 3 years in Longmeadow. Many people move to this community because they appreciate the unique character of Longmeadow. I have worked very hard in the past 3 years trying to preserve and enhance the character of this community. I've helped implement and design the recycling program. I've supported many programs for the elderly, such as a full-time nurse for the Council on Aging. I'm a member, a co-president of the Longmeadow Social Daycare, which is daycare for the frail elderly in Longmeadow. I'm also an ex officio board member of the Town Tripper, the new shuttle bus that circles the community. I've worked with the schools to try to enhance that program in Longmeadow. I've been appointed to 2 task forces by the school committee, and I presently serve on the Crossing Guard Committee representing the Board of Selectmen on that committee. I've supported programs such as returning money to the budget to trim the trees on the tree belt and plant the trees because I think that's important to the community. I was not in favor of widening Longmeadow Street to increase the traffic flow because I think that would be detrimental to the community. But of all the things I've been involved in, I think the accomplishment I'm most proud of in the past 3 years is helping create the Strategic Planning Committee. Now, that committee is a board that's composed of representatives from all the boards and commissions in town that have anything to do with land use. We sit around and we have dialogue about the land that's remaining in the community, the pressures that might be on that land for development and growth, and what might be the best use for that land in terms of the needs of the community. We have a very limited amount of land, and we're talking about what's the best use for that land. Out of that kind of dialogue have come things like the Historic Districts Preservation Plan, the Fair Housing Commission's plan, an application by the Board of Selectmen to become a mass housing partnership community. And now, in fact, the Planning Board is talking about seeking funds for a master plan for the community that would integrate all these concepts. So this dialogue has been an invaluable thing for today and for the future of Longmeadow. Another thing that I've been involved in since being on the board is seeking regional solutions to our problems. I am presently the town's representative on the Pioneer Valley Transit Authority Board. I was the co-president of the Resource Recovery Coalition, which was a coalition of businessmen and lay people to try to have the trash burn facility open as scheduled. And I'm now working with the East Longmeadow Board of Selectmen, planning a joint household hazardous waste collection day between our 2 communities. Having been involved and having done this within the community, I've been impressed that good leadership in municipal government has a few very special qualities. 1, you need to have ideas. 2, you need to have the energy to carry out those ideas. You need to be level-headed so you make good decisions for the community. And you need to know how government works. You need to know how to choose and pick and use all the resources within the community and in the region in order to find the best solutions for problems facing the town. I've served on the Board of Selectmen for 3 years, and I have that experience. By running again for re-election, I'm offering that experience back to the community. I feel that my experience and the fact that I have proven that I can get results for the community make me the best candidate for the Board of Selectmen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. Okay, Ben has been picked to go second. Ben, would you please make your opening remarks?
Thank you, Tom. First of all, I'd like to thank Channel 8, Tom Foster, Julie Tippo, and Ford Turner for being here, and a special thanks to Joe Curran for giving up his Talk of the Town show. In the 8 years that Marcia and I have been in Longmeadow, we've been very involved in the town. Marcia's involved, very active in the Junior League. She's been involved and is currently on the board of the Blueberry Hill PTO, and she's currently also on the Christian Education Board at First Church. I've been coaching Little League for 3 years. I've coached soccer for 2 years, and also have been involved in many committees and boards at First Church. Most recently, I've just finished up being the chairman of the stewardship campaign for this year. It is this involvement in the town that has led me to get more interested in the local town politics. Now, I feel that there are two key ingredients to being a successful selectman. The first is financial responsibility. We've all read that that the town is facing a major financial problem at this point, and the next selectman must be well versed in planning, organizing, prioritizing, and developing strategies to meet our goals. With my business degree, with my master's degree in business administration and my 15 years of business experience, I'm well versed in those disciplines. The second key ingredient is people skills. This is a very small community, and there's a very fine balance between the elected town officials, the people who work for the town, and the townspeople themselves. We must all come together to work very closely to solve our problems at this point. My business experience has taught me that when you all come together and work as a team, you can get much more accomplished rather than people pulling in different directions. Next April, there will be a banker and a lawyer on the Board of Selectmen. I feel that the third seat should be filled with a business person who has the training to get the job done, who has a business experience of getting the job done, and who has the time and the drive to get the job done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. And finally, Attorney Matthew King. Matthew?
Thank you, Tom. Good evening again. My name is Matthew King, and I'm the third candidate speaking to you today who is running for a selectman in Longmeadow for the primary election coming up on February 14th. I think what Ben had to say is a good point, that people skills are crucial to an effective board of are crucial to a selectman who's going to be sitting on the Board of Selectmen. And I think that's one of the key attributes that I would bring to the board. I'm a recent resident in Longmeadow. I've been here for about 2.5 years, and after getting settled here in Longmeadow, decided that I wanted to get involved in the town functioning rather than having decisions being made for me. I wanted to get involved, and that's part of the reason why I'm running for selectman this year. One of the principal reasons I'm running is because I perceive a need for a new attitude on the board. Having gone door to door, speaking with the various town residents in town, very many of them express a concern that their feelings, the people's feelings, their attitudes are not being responded to. And I think that has been recently demonstrated with respect to the town yard vote, with respect to the 2.5 override vote. That was something that was recommended by the Board of Selectmen, that was voted on and denied by the townspeople, and immediately thereafter, the people were greeted with, hey, this is what we have to do. We're going to take whatever steps we have to do to make that possible. And I don't think that that's the type of attitude that the Board of Selectmen should have. I perceive the Board of Selectmen as being a finder of alternatives, cooperating amongst all the department heads, all the various committees in town, gathering all the facts, preparing the alternatives, and throwing out those alternatives to the town. In our town form of government, it's the townspeople that vote on the issues, and it's the townspeople that decide the issues, and not the Board of Selectmen, the school committee, or the various departments in town. And as a selectman, I would throw out, as I said, gather as much facts as I could, throw out the alternatives to the public, and hopefully the public would make the most educated decision in each particular circumstance. And I thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you very much, Matt. Well, I think you can see, ladies and gentlemen, we have three very qualified individuals seeking the office of Selectman of Longmeadow. Now, again, in order to aid and assist you, the taxpayer, in making that proper choice, on February 14th, we have with me tonight, as I said, Julie Tipo from the Longmeadow News and Ford Turner from the Springfield Union News. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting off asking a particular candidate a question, and the other two candidates will have a chance to respond to that question after the initial answer by the first addressed question. So I think hopefully this will give you, the taxpayers, a chance not only to hear the questions from the reporters, but also to hear the interaction from these three very qualified candidates. So to start the question, I turn it over now to Julie Tipo from the Longmeadow News. Julie, if you'd like to ask the first question.
Okay. There are some seniors in Longmeadow who have a concern that in the near future they'll no longer be able to financially be able to stay in Longmeadow. I was wondering if you could tell me if you have any answers for them on how they can stay in town.
Now, this first question will go to Arlene, and then Ben and Matt will have the opportunity of responding.
I guess there's, do you want me to begin?
Yes, go ahead.
There are two ways to look at that. One, in terms of the tax structure, and two, in terms of maintaining a home. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Certainly, providing additional housing for the elderly has been something that has been talked about by this Board of Selectmen and by the Strategic Planning Committee. It's one of the priorities of the Strategic Planning Committee in terms of land use to provide increased housing for the elderly. Variety of housing types are needed, we believe. Congregate housing, affordable housing, and maybe even condominium housing. The project, the Meadow Woods project, may in fact fulfill some of the need that's been defined because of the structure, the variety of structure of homes that would be offered through that. We are looking to provide congregate living arrangements within Longmeadow, and we're seeking several different alternatives to provide that. In terms of the tax structure, it's our challenge every budget season to try to keep the lid on spending as best we can, keeping in mind balancing the priorities, the needs of the community, the services that the citizens want as well.
All right. Ben, do you have any response to that question?
Just only to add that the affordable housing question is one that is a major concern to the town. We are now facing a situation where we're going to be forced into developing housing as faster than we, the town, would like to go. We need to sit down and plan and organize how we're going to attack this problem that we're having right now.
Matt, any question?
I would just respond by saying I think that there has been a resistance to some growth in terms of low-income housing. I think that that resistance has to be overcome. I think in speaking to a lot of elderly people, they have some real legitimate concerns, and they're not going to be able to afford housing in this town. With respect to the tax issue, not only are there proposed fees for garbage collection and leaf collections, but there's also a proposed general 2.5 override, a proposed override for the town yard, and a proposed override for the center school. And I think a combination of those overrides is certainly going to put a tremendous burden on the elderly people and the persons on fixed income in this town. I think we have to do something about that.
Great, thank you. Okay, Ford Turner from the Springfield Union News. Please address your first question to Ben Russell.
Good evening, Mr. Russell. I think the word override is going to be mentioned in many questions tonight, and this is going to be the first of them. It appears that each of the several large projects that the town is talking about now, a library expansion, center school expansion, the town yard, are going to require an override of Proposition 2.5. Do you see any way, or do you have any new ideas to avoid using that avenue to accomplish any of those projects?
Do you want me to attack all three, or just one, or in general? In general, I'll speak first. The override situation is one that where the town is looking at. Many people within the town, many respected people within the town, in fact, the Board of Selectmen to a man, the Appropriations Committee to a man, and the School Committee to a person. I'm sorry. Thank you.
It's okay. That's okay.
I apologize. To a person, have recommended that we go with an override. It's a situation that I feel that we're running into some major problems, and it has to be looked at on a line-by-line basis. I am not going to say that a 2.5 override is out of the question. I have to look at the situation, I have to look at the line-by-line budget, and take into consideration the proposals that have been put forth by the various boards going on. If all other means of raising revenues have been exhausted, and we are in a situation where the town is running out of funds, in order to maintain the services and the quality of life that we have enjoyed so far, then an override may be the way to go.
Thank you. Matt, would you like to respond to that?
I'd like to respond by saying that I think that there has to be a vision toward the future and future planning. The general override that's being discussed now is going to impose a tremendous burden on the townspeople in excess of $300 or $400 per year on their tax bill. If that's taken in isolation, then you're going to have to face an override with respect to the town yard and again with the center school. They're talking about a $3 million project now. I don't know what additional burden that's going to place on the townspeople, but that's going to be another tremendous burden. And with an $8 million proposed project with the center school, again, a tremendous burden added to the already high taxes in town. I think that we have to examine these in total and present a total package to the townspeople.
Arlene?
Yeah, I think there's no question that making capital improvements on facilities is a difficult thing to do under the constraints of Proposition 2.5. We don't have that kind of leeway within the budget. We are exploring all kinds of creative ways to fund those projects, and each of them individually have different approaches. The library has the ability to raise funds independently, probably better than any of the other two projects. The town yard, we're looking at a lease purchase type of agreement, building in phases and not building a $3 million project. Center School possibly has monies coming back from the state for that sort of thing. Long term, it would be real nice to have a capital improvement portion of every budget annually to try to avoid a big outlay at one time for capital improvements. Something to look at.
Okay, thank you. Julie, would you please address your next question to Matthew King?
Attorney King, what solution would you have to provide smoother communication between the selectmen, the Appropriations Committee, and the school committee?
I don't know what solutions I would have. I have some suggestions, and I think one of those suggestions is getting a weekly report into the Longmeadow News, into the Reminder, and to other sources of information to present to the public. I think certainly the principal communication problem is not amongst the department heads, although there has been a problem there, but I think there's a problem in communicating with the townspeople. And I think we have to, as a group of selectmen, we have to do a better job of providing information to the public, making them aware of the alternatives, and then again, as I said, having them to make an educated decision on the various choices. That's in part what I would propose.
Arlene, your response to that question?
Yeah, if your question is dealing with the three boards communicating, I think we all can do a better job of communicating. I look forward to our meeting Monday night where the school committee will sit down with the Appropriations Committee and the selectmen and discuss the budget. We've done more and more of that in the last 3 years than before. We are talking, Mr. King might be interested in a town newsletter. Some town in the Midwest, we found a model, does a publication quarterly to the residents. If we could have it self-funding and done on a volunteer basis and not cost the taxpayers anything, it's something we would like to do to better educate the community. But with in-house, we are doing a better job and just need to keep working at it, I think.
And what about yourself, Ben, in terms of better communication?
Well, I think that communication is the key. Many of the programs that have either been unpopular or unsuccessful that have been proposed by either the school committee or the selectmen or whatever board have not really been explained fully to the community. This is a responsible community. It's a well-educated community, and I think with responsible government presenting a responsible plan to the community, it will meet with approval.
And I would hope also that, one of the valuable things that we're seeing tonight is the utilization of Channel 8, and I would hope that, there's more utilization of Channel 8 amongst the boards in using this as the public access that it does provide. Now, Ford, if you'd please address your next question to Mrs. Miller.
Okay, Mrs. Miller, in view of the wide margin by which the override proposal last fall was defeated, I believe it was about 2 to 1, mm-hmm. Looking back, would you still do it again? Would you still push for an override again? And if your answer is yes, what would you do differently approaching it to ensure a better turnout for the Board of Selectmen?
Okay. That particular question was for capital improvement override for the town yard. If your question is would I seek any override again or would I seek the town yard question again, I'll answer it as if you're suggesting the town yard. Is that what you mean?
The same situation.
The same project. At this time, I would not seek an override for the town yard. I would not seek the same proposal through that vehicle. We've been impressed with the public opinion that the $3 million structure is not one that the town can swallow. We will approach it with a scaled-down model. The project will not go away. The facility will fall down first. As we all know, it's in very bad repair and something needs to be done. Perhaps over 4 or 5 years, we can make repairs and redo the structure that needs to be rebuilt. with alternate funding plans. If there is an override for that facility, it would not be for a $3 million override.
Now, what about yourself? I imagine in Ben's case, Ben, if you were to improve the town yard, how would you go about doing it? I guess that would be the way that you ask Ben that question for.
Are we
Not
looking
having
at
been
the
involved in
town
the
yard, or are
original-
we looking at...
My
just-
question to Mrs. Miller was, would you, if you had the same circumstances, would you do it all over again? And
Okay.
if you want to comment on what she said.
Well, on the override for the town yard situation, I just feel that, again, the town yard, we all know, is in very bad condition. As Arlene said, that we've got to make improvements to it, whether we do it all at once or whether we do it piecemeal throughout the years, is a question that the town has pretty much answered in their override, or their rejection of the override. The town yard does need work. It does need help. There are many people in town who've got some good ideas as to how to work on the situation. And I think that, again, this going back to the communication situation that we just asked and talked about, utilizing many of the ideas that have come from the townspeople and that have come from the people within the community who've got some good ideas on how to deal with that situation.
Great. What about yourself, Matt, in terms of the town yard and the override and what you would do about it?
Well, in anticipation of several possible overrides, I think I would have done a better, or tried to do a better job of educating the people as to the various overrides that would be sought during the course of the year. With respect in particular to the town yard, I think that it was incumbent upon the selectmen to do a better job of seeking out alternatives. In this particular case, one architect was allocated $90,000 to prepare a final architectural design for a $3 million project. Now, the town voted in support of the project, but rejected the override. And I think that that's a reflection of not being adequately informed of where the monies were going to come from. I think that it would have been a better course to seek alternative plans, to pay a lesser amount of money per proposed design, and then come up with the plan that was most palatable to the town. And rather than try to force the choice on the townspeople, let them, again, make an informed decision based upon several choices.
Okay, thank you very much. Julie, would you please address your next question to Ben Russell?
Mr. Russell,
Married on the air.
Yeah.
could you prioritize for me what you think should be at the town yard in terms of the new facility, if there was to be a new facility, or the old facility? What you think is most important down at the town yard?
Most important down at the town yard, well, there are a couple of things that need to be done. If we were to build a new structure, offices for the Department of Public Works, where the offices that they have right now are very cramped and very small, and it would be very helpful to everyone to have offices of the Department of Public Works right at the site where all of the vehicles are kept and where a lot of the work is done. Garaging for all of the town vehicles. I mean, we spend and we invest a lot of money in town vehicles, and at current times they're not being garaged very well. So there are two basic areas. I think that the first one, though, if we're dealing with the site that we have, is are the garages. Then a point that I didn't bring up are the fuel tanks underground. We've had some leaking of the fuel tanks, and those have got to be inspected and made sure that we're not leaking any fuel or into the soil. And it is a conservation area, and we've got to be very careful of that. So it would be garages, fuel tanks, and offices if we were going to look at a new structure.
Matt, what about yourself? What would you do in prioritizing the town yard, especially in the deplorable condition that it currently is being maintained?
I would say, Tom, that I'm pretty much in agreement with Ben. I think that we have to house the town's vehicles, and I think that we can make some office space available for the town employees. I again would reiterate that I think that it's more on a scale rather than the type of project that's proposed. I do think that we should make the leaking fuel tanks a major priority. As of now, I don't think we're aware of the environmental problems that those leaky tanks pose at this time. And I think that we really have to make an intensive effort to find out if those tanks are going to pose a a threat to our environment. I think that has to be something to take an immediate look at.
Okay, Arlene?
I can go backwards and tell you that we've already done that. And the fuel tanks are going to be replaced and taken care of this year, this fiscal year, because we're not going to wait to roll that down the road to take care of that problem. I would say that reiterate that the proposal by the Town Yard Study Committee was an excellent one and covered all the areas that each of my opponents have mentioned in terms of prioritizing the needs down there. However, I would go in a little bit other different order. I think a maintenance area is primary. I think storage for the vehicles would be secondary. The recycling center would be third in my mind. The office space would be the last thing, in fact, would be the first thing I would eliminate from the project, because we do have office space, even though it is cramped. We do not have a maintenance area that's adequate. We have a crumbling recycling center, and we do not have any adequate space to store vehicles.
Okay, Ford, would you like to address your next question to Matthew King?
Mr. King, with the school department budget taking up as much of the town's overall budget as it does, it's about 57%, would you continue the process that is currently followed for determining the school department budget, that is allocating the school committee a share of the town pie, so to speak, and letting them work with that? Or would you encourage working on the school committee budget alongside all the other departmental budgets throughout the budget process, combining it more than it is now?
I'm not sure if I understand the question completely, Ford. If you could just, I think by law, the school committee is autonomous and is responsible for setting its own budget. Now, we have allotted 57% of the overall town's budget to the school department, and I'm not sure what changes we can make to that. With respect to the school committee's budget, the school department's budget, there's been a lot of discussion about that. And in an article in today's paper, there's a discussion that the school department was seeking an override, and in their share looking for $935,000 of increased budget funding. Now, if you take that figure, 57% of the overall budget, that comes out to a 1.935 some odd proposed override, and that is substantially higher than the numbers that have been proposed by Lou Allen. I think that we have to sit down and discuss the matter with the school department, have them itemize their expenditures, and they've done that to a degree, but really sit down and explain to the public why they don't think certain cuts are warranted, but why by law they can't make certain cuts, and why they're proposing the separate budgets that they're proposing. Right now there have been three separate budgets proposed, one for a level funded budget, one for a maintenance budget, as is referred to by Dr. McGarry, and one for an improved budget. And their $935,000 request is, I think, a little bit over the improved budget that's proposed by Dr. McGarry, and I think that's something that has to be looked at.
Okay. Arlene, your response to that?
There's a lot to respond to. I'll try to pick and choose here. Nobody is proposing a $1.9 million override. That's nowhere on the table, and don't everybody think that, because that will get a lot of confusion out there. In terms of the piece of the pie and the 57%, that's a real good question. There's a real fine balance between the total amount of monies we can spend and how much ought to be for education and how much ought to be for other services in the community. I think there has to be a balance. Certainly the departments that the selectmen are in charge of have the ability to generate more revenue so we can have more fee-for-services than the schools are capable of. However, it's hard for me to justify cutting fire and policemen when they're adding personnel. It's a real fine balance, and one we have to continue to work at. I don't know that I'd be strictly to 57%, but I sure don't think the balance ought to swing too far the other way either.
Okay. And Ben, your response to that question?
Well, Arlene just mentioned balance of budgets and balancing revenues and everything. I think it's more a function and more a problem of balancing of people, trying to get the school committee and the Board of Selectmen to work together to work out this problem. There is a constant, seems to be a constant, not battle, but problems going on between the school committee and the Board of Selectmen. Then that's got to be worked out. That's got to be a much smoother operating procedure than it is at the time.
Okay, thank you. Julie, would you like to address your next question to Arlene?
Mrs. Miller, could you outline what your plans for Longmeadow are in regards to long-range planning?
Well, yes. I think we need to define land that's available and what the best need for that land would be and what the needs of the community are. The Strategic Planning Committee has worked had dialogue for about 12 months about that question, and the priorities that they came up with in terms of planning were that we need to provide housing, affordable housing and housing for the elderly. We need to look at preserving open space, and we need to preserve our parks, and we need to preserve the school system. And I think that in terms of long-range planning, those are, if we decide the priorities, things that are important to the community, and then we look at the resources we have, we can define how to fit those two together.
Okay. Ben, your response to that?
I really can't come up with anything better. I think that, if we just define our proper use of the available land that we have to go in and make sure that the quality of lifestyle that we've all enjoyed in the past will continue in the future. And we have to make sure that those people who are living here in town now can continue to afford to live here in town, now and into the future.
Right. Matt?
Well, I think Arlene and Ben are pretty much on point. I think it's important that we do prioritize and look to the appropriate land use, but I think there's a little bit of a conflict in terms of discussing preserving open space and preserving park space at the same time as developing land for low-income housing or alternative housing. I think that we have to get more community input as to what uses that we can make of the land and try to cooperate with landowners, having them cooperate with the community and the community cooperating with them. I think the state has repeatedly threatened to hold back state funds unless there's some more affordable housing in town. And I think that we have to devise a plan to make that possible, to provide affordable housing and keep the state monies coming into the town.
And I think, all of you make a good point relative to the lines of communications. I think that's one of the things you as taxpayers have to realize is, oftentimes, we criticize public officials for what they're doing, and yet we're not willing to go out and give ideas. Ideas from the town relative to the town yard, ideas relative to strategic planning. They do have committees that the selectmen and the various other committees form to try to get input from you, the taxpayer. So if you care about these issues, let these public officials know about it. And when these committees are being formed, tell them you want to sit on them because, these are the types of things that they want to hear. They want to hear your viewpoints. And I think in strategic planning, you want to reflect the ideas of the community rather than trying to guess what their feelings are all about. And I think that's important for you as select persons and you as the community. Okay, Ford, would you like to address your next question to Matt King? I'm sorry,
Mr. Russell. Mr. Russell, I believe.
Mr. Russell.
Given the very limited amount of open space left in Longmeadow, there's very few properties here and there that are not developed. Would you in the future at some point allow developers to consider working in the meadows or using any property in the meadows for development?
Well, the meadows is an area that much of it is under wetlands, much of it is under the floodplain, so there's not a whole lot of development property down there. What we have to do is sit down, not only look at the meadows, but look at all available land within town. We need to look at our tax base. We need to increase our tax base. There are certain parcels of land that could possibly be used for industrial use or commercial use as opposed to residential. All the Strategic Planning Committee and the Long Range Planning Committee need to sit down and look at each parcel of land that we have and figure out its best possible use for the present time as well as into the future.
Great. Matt, your response to that?
Well, I think it was just before you probably started covering Longmeadow, Ford, that was a very heated discussion at the town meeting. Lou Gasick was one of the primary landowners down in the meadows, and there was a proposed bylaw, I think, that would pretty much prohibit him from developing that land. Now, the land does lie within the wetlands, and by law, by the DEQE regulations, the possibilities for development down there are very limited from the outset. But I think that the alternatives in that particular section of town have to be explored. If it's possible that land housing can go up there or some other types of development, then we have to be open to at least listen to the proposals. And I think in that particular instance, the town overwhelmingly voted to vote down that bylaw and allow whatever development could be maintained to go by the DEQE guidelines.
Arlene, was it in the wetlands or was it in the floodplain?
It was in the floodplain.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a floodplain zone,
Right.
is what it is.
Okay. And
Zone.
your response to that, Arlene?
Yeah, that land is zoned floodplain,
Right.
as you've just said, and there will be pressure in the future because there's very little remaining land in our community, and that is a large parcel of land. I believe, and I've looked at this very carefully because there have been proposals, there have been discussions, although the Board of Selectmen has no authority over that land whatsoever. It's the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Planning Board, the Conservation Commission, and the Board of Health that have authority over that land. The Zoning Board can give a variance, and the Planning Board can to build in that, even though it is a floodplain zone. I think that land is best, God made it to absorb the water from the river, and I think it's best used to do that. It's a beautiful farmland, it's beautiful open space, it's good recreation land and good conservation land. It would take a lot of convincing to change my mind for me to support any kind of building down there at all.
Okay, Ford, your next question, Attorney King, or Julie.
Julie.
Attorney King, with the understanding that Fire Chief James O'Brien's going to be retiring this year, could you give me a list of qualifications that you'd like to see in a new fire chief?
Well, I think certainly I would want somebody that had a great deal of experience in a fire department. That's the first thing I'd look for. And somebody who has administration skills, somebody that's going to be able to deal with his employees or his charge, so to speak. I think that you have to have somebody that's going to be able to coordinate a large group of people to effectively fight fires in town. And so the principal criteria I'd be looking at is somebody with experience.
Okay, Ben, your response to that?
Excuse me?
No,
Don't I go next?
Well, you can if you want. Go ahead. I was going to try to...
Oh, you're trying to catch us up. All right, fine.
Nobody was paying attention. I just wanted to catch you off guard. Go ahead, Arlie. You can go ahead. Just trying to change it up a little bit. You don't want to wallow
Now I
in
lost my
complacency.
train of thought. No, that's okay. I
qualifications for
appreciate
police
what
chief.
Matt said. I think he's pretty much on target. One of my priorities would be management skills. We've been looking, surely with budget restraints and those kinds of problems, we need to get the most out of every department we can have, and management skills become a priority these days. Certainly experience in the firefighting service is important as a leader in the firefighting service, as a captain at least. Whether this individual ought to come from within house or outside of house is something that we have not determined, but I think the ability to manage and budget, use equipment, and have some experience in the service are important.
Right, Ben?
The key points have been covered. Obviously, the person who's got to have experience within the fire department, they've got to have key management skills and key administration skills.
Okay, thank you. Ford, your next question.
This is for Mrs.
Mrs. Miller, right.
I am confused.
Some residents still can't understand the process that took place before the architect was hired to design the new town yard, or the old new town yard. Can you rehash or go through again and put in a nutshell what led you to the decision to pay an architect X thousands of dollars to design a building that was never built and the override was rejected?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. What occurred is some preliminary plans were made, or before any plans could be made, the needs were defined of what we needed for the town yard by the department heads that used that facility. Once that occurred, the town yard building committee went out with a request for proposal to architects in the area. People came in with their plans, and it was like a bidding process, and an architect was chosen from a field of architects who would work with the town to design the plans for the town yard. In order to go to the town to request any kind of dollars to build a facility, as the Center School Study Committee can tell you, and the Library Committee can tell you, you have to have some sort of plan, so you have to have an architect on board and be paying an architect to be doing preliminary drawings so you can have an estimate for the cost of the building. That occurred, so some monies were spent in that regard. Then the question became critical that you want me to answer, I'm sure, is that from the time the project was approved by the annual town meeting in May, the selectmen unanimously decided, with the recommendation of the town yard building committee, to have the architect continue his plans and refinement of his plans through the summer months, even though the override had not yet occurred. We did that because if we had not done that, and we had permission from the town to go ahead and build the yard, we would have lost a year of building time, and the cost of the project would have gone up. So we decided to take the chance and have him continue refining his plans, and that's when that additional money was spent between May and September. As soon as the override was defeated, that contract was stopped.
Okay, Matt, your response to that.
Well, it's my understanding that the money was spent before it was ever approved. At least a portion of that money was spent before it was approved, and I think that was a fatal mistake. I also think that given the fact that the town approved the plan that was presented to them but rejected the 2.5 override, I think that there was a mistake in the way that the combination of the two was presented to the town. I think, although it's been explained today that there were alternatives that were being proposed, I don't think there's a large portion of the public that aren't convinced that there were several alternatives that were proposed and that much more financially feasible alternatives were explored. And I think that that's something that it should have been done and wasn't done.
Okay. Ben, your response to that?
In September of '87, the town approved an allocation of $28,000 some odd dollars for architectural fees and drawings. And that is what the town thought was going to be necessary to get a plan together for which the town could vote on. At that point, when the plan came through, all of a sudden the cost had gone up to $96,000. There's a difference of $70-some odd thousand that should not have been allocated, should not have been spent before getting approval from the town.
I'd like to interject a question, if I could, on this whole issue, and that is the questions relative to the town yard have focused on, the fact that the override didn't pass, the fact that this money had been, appropriated for the architect and whatever, and we've also talked about what you'd like to see in terms of prioritizing the actual, like the maintenance and things of this sort. But let me ask you, starting with you, Ben, given the constraints, the land constraints that we have in town, given the constraints that we've already seen relative to development of the existing building, what would you do if you had to take the town yard as it is right now and improve it to the point where we'd like to see it? What would you actually do?
In the town yard?
Yeah. What would you do in the town yard, and would you renovate the existing structure? Would you build a whole new structure? Would you look for another piece of land? What would you actually do to the town yard?
Well, I'd like to look for another piece of land. The piece of land down there, the major cost that we're talking about in the town structure right now is really because of the land that it's on, because of the settling. We're talking about a whole new foundation into the whole structure, which adds roughly about $500,000 to the cost of the town yard. That's the key problem down there. I would like to really look for another piece of property to put the town yard on, build a smaller structure, build a structure that's less expensive, and to house offices as well as the equipment.
Great. What about yourself, Arlene? Given the constraints that we have with town land to begin with.
A whole year was spent looking for another piece of land by the Town Yard Study Committee, and they searched every single piece of land in the community. And I feel very confident that unless we use parkland, and Mr. Foster can speak to that, that does not receive very well. Conservation land is not received very well to use. There just is no other land to use except the site. I agree it's not the best because of the land. That was a compromise we made, and that's the way things happened. And I think I would build it on that site. I would agree to scale down the project, but something has to be done.
Great. Matt, what about yourself?
Well, I'm not sure whether there was an effort made to contact individual landowners. I don't know if what landowners there are that might be amenable to having such a project maintained on their land. I do think that other sources have to be looked at, other sites have to be looked at. I do think that ultimately we'll end up on that site, and I think that Ben and Arlene are correct that a new building should go in there at some point.
Okay, thank you. Julie, your next question for Matt King.
With the current budget dilemma facing the town, and we've heard in the news media that it's been facing other towns also, could you tell us whether you have any joint programs that other towns, could work together as?
This is for Matt. For Matt King.
Attorney King.
I'm not sure if I understand your question, Julie.
Other towns are experiencing budget constraints, and I'm wondering if the surrounding towns, if there are any programs that you can think of that they could work together on to save some funds.
There are none that I'm aware of, and that might just be due to my lack of having been involved in the Board of Selectmen and the town political experience as of yet. I do think that we have to analyze our own present budgetary structure, take it apart piece by piece to see if perhaps we're doing something wrong. I think one of the problems that we as a town have experienced is a lack of foresight in the planning for the town's future. I'll just refer back to the town yard situation. If the only way that town yard could be built was to get a 2.5 override, that should have been explained to the people. We should have coordinated that project with other projects that are being proposed. I think we have to utilize the maximum amount of state aid available, and I don't know if that's being done now. I know that we do have about 25% reimbursement from the state. I think we really have to concentrate on maximizing our state reimbursement and exploring possible alternatives and look toward the future.
Marlene?
Yeah, I want to rebut about something everybody said before. We did not spend money before it was allocated. The town meeting gave the selectmen the authority to borrow up to $3 million. Nobody said anything that we had to do an override. That was our decision to do an override. I don't want anybody to think we spent money. We cannot before it's allocated, and that is an incorrect assumption. In terms of regionalizing services and that sort of thing, which is your question, I think, to
Yes.
how we can save some money. We do have a regional trash facility where we use that. We are possibly will go into a regional leaf composting facility. I don't know. It may not be in our best interest. We are exploring regional solutions to stump and brush in terms of that. We will explore regional household hazardous waste. Maybe there's regional solution to fire protection. I don't know. We talk about that. We look at that. Maybe ambulance service can be regionalized. We certainly are in dialogue now about every third month with East Longmeadow Board of Selectmen. It's been a wonderful experience in terms of trying to share resources, and that's the kind of thing we need to continue to do with our neighbors. The way to go, I think.
Ben, your response to that?
No, I agree with what Arlene said, is that it gets back to the whole communications situation, where communicating not only amongst ourselves and amongst the townspeople, but amongst our neighbors, Agawam, East Longmeadow, Springfield, communicating with their Board of Selectmen, communicating with their different departments, making sure that we're utilizing our common resources and our current resources to the best utility as we can.
One of the things, another question I might ask, and I guess we'll start with you, Arlene, seeing it's your turn up, and that is relative to coordination of projects and coordination of different offices. Someone had mentioned to me about the possibility of combining the police chief and the fire chief under one as like a public safety officer.
Mm-hmm.
What would be your feeling relative to that?
Something to explore. I would have to see if it were cost effective to the community, and if there are individuals available that have the expertise to do that. If, maybe just a manager type person, a good manager, could run that with technical people under him or her.
Right.
If it were cost effective to the community, it's something that I would be willing to explore.
Matt, what about you?
Well, I'd be more hesitant to explore that. I think that each department requires a particular expertise, and although that it might be possible to find somebody that has experience both as a police officer or as a fire officer, I think it's more likely that we're going to have to concentrate with the police department having its police chief and the fire department having its fire chief. I think that's the only way you're going to maximize the people that you have in the departments, and you're going to maximize the communication between the chief and the people below him.
Okay. Ben?
I think that a public safety officer is something that should be explored. What it does is it gives you a general manager over those key safety elements within the town, the police and the fire. Letting the police department do what they're good at, letting the fire department do what they're good at, with one overall administrator administrating both departments.
Okay, Ford, your next question for Ben Russell.
Okay, Mr. Russell, given the current pretty grim financial situation in Longmeadow, how strongly do you support the two ideas that have been proposed to raise new revenue, that is, charging for leaf collection and charging for trash collection? And I believe the figure that's been tossed around is those two would raise about $500,000.
In every community that I've ever lived in, Trash collection has been an added fee. Leaf collection, I've never heard of a town picking up leaves. It's a wonderful service that we have. I wish that we could maintain it. But when times are financially tough, there's certain services that we're just going to have to pay for. We can't have our cake and eat it too. This is a community that it's a wonderful community, and we all love to live here. But there are certain services that, unfortunately, in a tight financial time, we just may have to give up. Now, when you get to the situation of a service fee or a user fee for garbage collection, it can be done in a very equitable way. It can be done in a way where a family or someone who uses a lot of trash can pay accordingly, and the elderly or single person who doesn't use that much trash can be charged accordingly. It can be done on an equitable basis, so it's charged as needed. Leaves, we have a leaf dump. We can pick up our own leaves and take them down to the dump ourselves, so that is not necessarily a cost. It would be a cost savings to the town, not necessarily incurring costs by the individuals.
Matt, your response to that?
Well, I'd just like to point out that those two services that are now being provided are being provided for out of our taxpayers' taxes. And certainly they are present luxuries, but they're a luxury that a lot of people don't want to do away with. It's true that by charging fees for these services, we could raise somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000. But when the school department alone is projecting a $735,000 shortfall, that's not going to do it. I think, again, we have to re-examine our budgets, see whether or not money is being used in the most cost-effective manner, and explore alternatives. Right now, we can deduct these fees from our taxes. That won't be possible if we go to fees for services. And as far as the monitoring garbage collection, I think that would be a very difficult process to say, well, this family is using 4 garbage cans and one family is using 1 or 2 garbage cans. I think that would be a difficult thing to control.
Arlene, your response?
Yeah, I think we're in the process, the Appropriations Committee, the Selectmen, and the School Committee certainly, in listing the priorities that they're able to provide and that they want to continue to provide in terms of services and how much money there is available to provide those services. And then it's our responsibility to come up with a plan to find the money. Under the Proposition 2.5, there's a limit to what we can raise through taxation. The user fee concept is a legitimate approach to allowing the continuation of certain services and still getting some other revenue. Ben is correct in that there are models in New Jersey and in Washington State where trash fees can be charged that are very equitable in terms of amount of trash generated and the fee. It's very easy to do. We have models. The Recycling Commission is working now on a model to propose to the town if, in fact, we choose to use that vehicle. I would withhold judgment on whether we'll do it or not this year because we're in the middle of the budget process, and once we have a priority set and all our needs defined, then we will decide how to go about getting the revenue for it.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Arlene. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, I think the candidates have been under these hot lights for a while, and we're going to take a short break to allow them to rest for a moment because we still have a lot of questions that are coming in on the phones. And again, if you do have any call or any questions relative to these candidates or some of the issues we discussed, please call the number you see on the screen, 567-9397. And speaking of fiscal constraints and also talking about limiting services, we're going to take our break right now. We'll be back in about 5 or 6 minutes, and I hope you pay close attention to what you're about to see on the screen right now, because without your help, we won't be able to continue to bring you shows such as this and allow you to sit down with these candidates and explore the issues that confront you, the taxpayer, and you, the voter of Longmeadow. So please stay tuned. We'll be right back. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tom Foster, and I'm on the board of directors of Channel 8. I hope you're enjoying the viewing that you're seeing this evening, the program that you're seeing this evening. But without your support and without your help, we won't be able to bring you these important issues that affect our town. And I know myself, having been involved now with Channel 8 for 3 years, I've been able to bring you football, lacrosse, wrestling, basketball, both men and women's basketball, field lacrosse, field hockey for the women, and various sports like this. And a lot of times people say to me, gee, Tom, I wish that you could do my child's sport, my child's particular event. But unfortunately, these programs that are brought to you on Channel 8 have to be funded. Someone has to be paid to go out and do those programs. From my own perspective, I volunteer my time. But the other people that provide you with these programs have to be paid. And without your support, we can't pay them and we can't bring you these very vital programs for our community well-being. Now, besides the athletic events that I'm involved in with Channel 8, I'm also involved in with Joe Curran and Joyce Rosati on Talk of the Town. And Talk of the Town has been very important to you, the taxpayer of Longmeadow, because Joe Curran, in his probing way, has gotten to the important issues that are affecting you, the taxpayer, so that you have the opportunity of going to that ballot booth and making the right decision for you and for our town. And without this ability of exploring these issues, you'd have to go to town meetings. You'd have to go to the school committee yourself. You'd have to go to the Board of Selectmen's meeting. But Channel 8 brings you those programs. They allow you to sit in your own living room and listen to what the school committee's talking about, listening to all this talk relative to override, listening to what the Board of Selectmen are dealing with. And without Channel 8, you'd actually have to go there yourself and participate. So Channel 8 allows you to do that. Also, for your younger children, we have Book Nook, we have Learning with Laney, and these are all very important in a child's developmental and learning process. And these are the types of things that make Channel 8 what it is. But again, without your support, without your money, Channel 8 will not be able to bring you these programs. Now, last year, we ran a telethon, and we'll be doing it again this year. And in that telethon, all we asked for you, the viewing audience, was to contribute $1 a month. Now, I know with the override coming, with new town yards, and with center school, you know, coming to you and asking you for money is something that maybe we shouldn't be doing. But maybe we shouldn't be bringing you these important programs. Maybe we shouldn't allow your children access to public TV. And that's what Channel 8 is all about. So all we're asking for is $1 a month. And it won't hurt because that can be put on your Continental Cablevision bill. And if you stop and think about it, how many of you that are watching tonight's program have watched any programs on Channel 8? And you should feel guilty if you are watching this program and you haven't contributed that $1 a month. Do you realize there are 4,000 viewing audience that are actually hooked up to Continental Cablevision? And of that 4,000 viewing audience, only 10% of you, 400 people, actually contribute that $1 a month. And if you're not part of that one person, that $1 a month, that 10%, you should feel guilty about watching Channel 8. We'd like to bring you all sorts of programs here on Channel 8, but in order for us to do that, we have to have the funds to do so. Now, this year, we are going to be running another program in the early part of June, another telethon. Last year, as part of the telethon program, I went out and went into the community. We first of all gave you the chance of seeing the outgoing police chief and listening to Rick Marquise, our new police chief, and what his viewpoints are going to be on public safety here in Longmeadow. We also had the opportunity of having live in the studio Ed Heafy, the new selectman, and got Ed's ideas on what was going to affect our town in the long haul. Also, how many of you have actually gone out into our parks here in Longmeadow and taken advantage of the services that the park department provides? Well, another thing we did as part of the telethon, we actually went out with Harry Reynolds, and we saw the parks. We listened to the services that we provide you as a taxpayer. We also were able to interview a vast and sundry array of people on all the various topics that affect you, the taxpayer of Longmeadow. Also, we were able to do live acts with some of the children of our town. And again this year, if you have any children or yourself that are interested in participating in this telethon, you have an act, you have a gripe to grieve, come on to Channel 8 during our telethon, and we'd be happy to air that. And during that telethon, again, we're going to be asking you for just $1 a month. Stop and think about it. $1 a month to continue with all these programs that Channel 8 has provided you with. So we ask you to participate in the telethon. We ask you to participate in our program, only $1 a month. And by doing so, we'll be able to continue to bring you the programs such as the one that you're seeing here tonight. So please, I ask you as a board of directors, as a fellow citizen, as a fellow taxpayer, and someone who really enjoys being involved with yourselves, being involved with your children, being involved in all the athletics and Talk of the Towns, because I feel a need for Channel 8. I feel a need for the programs that Channel 8 can bring to you. So again, I beseech you, if you can just give us $1 a month, and again, that can be billed directly through Continental Cablevision, put on your monthly bill. You'll never feel it coming out of your pocket. but the dollar that you don't feel coming out of your pocket can help subsidize a lot of these programs that we like to bring you here on Channel 8. And one of the things that a lot of parents ask me, they say, well, you know, Tom, we've got this event happening in my child's school. Would it be possible for Channel 8 to film it? Well, one of the things that we're thinking about here at Channel 8, if we can raise some additional funds, we are thinking about having a part-time person whose sole responsibility will be going around the town and filming various events throughout the schools and throughout the various communities. So if you have a child who's, let's say, for example, going to be involved in a school play, at Williams Middle School, at Center School, at Blueberry Hill, no matter what it is, if you contact us here at Channel 8, and we do have that part-time person who's available, we'll send them out to film that. And this is unique to our Longmeadow community. So let's keep it unique. Let's keep this going. Let's keep it flowing. And you can do that with that $1 a month. So I ask you again, from the bottom of my heart to the bottom of your heart, if you can give us that $1, then we can provide programs like this and keep the quality of life here in Longmeadow and the quality of you, the viewing audience, up to where it should be. So again, this is Tom Foster, thanking you. Enjoy the program that you're seeing tonight, and let's continue to see these types of programs. Thank you, and enjoy the programs. Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully that the little commercial that you saw in the intermission, so to speak, will make you enthusiastic enough to want to help out Channel 8, because it is a worthy cause, and we're very happy to be able to have the special Talk of the Town tonight to bring you these three very qualified candidates to address the issues. Now, as I said, you still see the number up on the screen, 567-9397. We will still take your calls until we go off air. One of the first questions that came in over the phone, or one of the first statements that came in over the phone, was addressed to me. And I wish the person would have identified themselves so I could apologize to you directly on screen. I was trying to genderize the office of select person so that it wouldn't be male-oriented, and the person writes or calls in and said that select person is not a word, that Madam Selectman should be used to address a woman. So, Arlene,
exactly
I do apologize for the person who did send it in.
There's only one person that would know that.
There's only one person who would know that. I was an English major in college, and I obviously never ran for the office of Madam Selectman, so I wasn't aware of that. So I do apologize, and Arlene, I do apologize to you. So on with the show, so to speak. We're going to start this last segment of our show with Julie Tipo asking a question of Ben Russell.
Okay, Mr. Russell, Longmeadow's roads being a throughway for other towns has been a concern of residents in the past. Do you have any plans on keeping the numbers of cars coming through town to a minimum?
Besides putting up a toll booth at Route 5 at both sides of the town, because we are a commuter town, basically we are a residential town, serving Hartford, serving Springfield, serving many different communities. It's very difficult to keep the amount of traffic down, especially during the rush hour times. So studies have been done, and they've been done continually on and on throughout the history of the town and the traffic problem that has been increasing. And without any major plans which would cost major expenditures, I really don't foresee doing anything at this point.
Matt, what about yourself on that issue?
Well, I don't foresee doing anything drastic at this point. I live right off of Longmeadow Street myself and commute into Springfield on a daily basis. And although traffic can be a slight problem in the morning, it never takes me any more than 10 or 15 minutes to get into work. And if you've ever worked outside of Boston, you know that that's kind of unusual. One of the things that people like about Longmeadow are the very wide, expansive greens on Longmeadow Street, the very wide sidewalks that allow people to walk up and down the streets in nice weather. And until the growth in Springfield or in town or outside of Springfield gets too great that it really causes a problem on Longmeadow Street, I don't think there's a dire need to make any changes at this point.
Okay. Arlene?
Yeah, I've served on every transit committee that there is in this town in the last 3 years because I was appointed to the PVTA, and I've been very aware of the traffic. Most of the traffic coming through Longmeadow are non-residents coming from East Longmeadow, Hamden, and Enfield cutting into Springfield. We have a problem. What we're trying to do is have dialogue with our neighbors in terms of alternate routes, if they become available. As there's growth in surrounding communities, such as there will be in East Longmeadow, we are constantly talking about, could the developer who's doing that put a light in such and such a place in our community to help control the flow of traffic? We're in constant dialogue about that. The PVTA is going to be doing a project with the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission in terms of long-range look at transit within the valley and see ways that we can increase the use of public transit to cut down these kinds of problems. There's a lot, traffic and traffic problems are high on the agenda of the leaders in the valley, and it's got to be looked at continually today and in the future.
Right. From my own perspective, I certainly hope that something is done, because living on Hillcrest Avenue, which is right off of Longmeadow Street, trying to get on Longmeadow Street at rush hour is almost impossible. So hopefully there will be some solution to these. Obviously, an over-congested Longmeadow Street. Okay, Ford, would you like to address your next question to Attorney King?
Okay, Mr. King, I'd like to ask you this question, and when the other two rebuttal periods come up, I think the nature of the question is such that you could just answer the question directly rather than rebut his statement. One current member of the Board of Selectmen has said several times that, or expressed the desire several times, that disagreements or arguments between the selectmen should probably be kept off camera or not in the public eye as much as they could be. How do you feel about a disagreement among a member of, or among a board of 3 selectmen? Should they argue on camera in public, or should they do that in private and present a unified front to the community?
Well, I think differences in opinion are healthy for any type of situation. You're not going to come up with ideas unless if you're all of the same mind. And I think it's very healthy to have 3 people providing different viewpoints. I do think that everybody has to respect the other person's viewpoint, and I think that we have to, as a Board of Selectmen, respect the townspeople's viewpoint. Again, I would stress that we have to do everything we can to open the lines of communication among the Board of Selectmen and with the other departments in town, and open up a dialogue with the townspeople so that we get their input. I don't see that different viewpoints are a real big problem.
Arlene?
I believe in the open meeting law, and I believe in saying what I feel, honestly, in terms of decision-making in the public. And I'm not offended by disagreements by other members of the Board of Selectmen, and you know this because you've heard it. I would not, I don't like planned, I wouldn't agree with somebody just to be kind on television. I think that it's our responsibility as elected officials to give the public our best and our honest shot at every issue that comes before us, whether we agree or disagree with the other people, and it ought to be done in public.
Ben?
I agree with that also. Disagreement can be healthy. What each person has to keep in mind is to try and keep their own personal bias out of that decision. The decision must be made for the common good of the town. And each of the 3 will have different opinions. And hopefully, with the communication, with the dialogue, there will be common consensus as to what's the best for the town.
Great, thank you. Okay, Julie, your next question, please address to Mrs. Miller.
Okay, Mrs. Miller, I'm going to start asking questions that the callers have made, the viewers have made.
Just call me Madam Selectman.
Madam
Madam
Selectman.
Selectman, right, please. Let's make this appropriate.
Okay, with 3 major, this is from Ann Schneider of 21 Field Road. We have 3 major capital expenditures that the town is facing, meaning the library, the town yard, and center school. She would like you all to prioritize the 3 projects.
You want to go through those one more time so the viewers
Sure.
hear that again, Julie?
It's the library, the town yard, and center school.
That's difficult. I think that the community would have to probably do that. In terms of my own view as a selectman, clearly the public service building is a priority. I feel that that's falling down. The center school can probably be repaired or closed. If it had to be, the library could survive without an addition. So I guess if I had to prioritize that, in terms of popularity, I think the library is the easiest issue to sell. Center school might be the 2nd easiest issue, and the town yard the 3rd. The community will decide those issues.
Ben, you're prioritizing?
Well, I agree that the community will decide upon the issues, but in my personal opinion, I would say that center school would be number 1. It's not to regulation for code or specs or anything like that. The town yard would be number 2. and the library would be number 3. The library, I feel, should be handled in a private manner.
Okay, Matt, and your level of prioritizing.
Of the 3, I would say that I would be in agreement with Ben that the library would be my 3rd priority, and that my first 2 priorities, either the town yard or the center school, would be very difficult. I think that the town has already recognized that there is a need for improvement in the town yard, and I think they've recognized that there is a need for improvement in the center school. It's going to be up to them to decide when those improvements are going to be made and how the monies are going to be derived to make those improvements.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ford, this is one of your own questions, not coming from the viewing audience, and would you please address it to Ben Russell?
Okay, Mr. Russell, this is a sort of hypothetical question. You make the Board of Selectmen, and after serving on it for a while, you feel that one of the other 2 members has been pulling his or her weight, hasn't been keeping up on issues, hasn't been sharing the responsibilities. How do you confront the situation, or how do you arrive at a solution to that? Do you talk to the person in private? Do you talk to the press? Or do you just hope or wait for the day they will be up for re-election?
This really is hypothetical.
No, in a situation like that, when you're dealing with someone who is not necessarily pulling their weight, as you said, I've had to deal with that in business many times. And what you do is you get them on the side and you slap them upside the head. You say, look, you know, this is a 3-man job. We do this privately. We have to do this. I mean, we have this discussion privately. You know, you knew that this job was going to be time-consuming. You knew that it was going to be important. And, you know, you've got to give your 3 years. And you've got to give it fairly and equally as we are doing it ourselves. It should be done privately, and it should be handled by either the other 2 members of the Board of Selectmen or the one person individually. But I don't think that should be aired publicly.
Okay, Matt, how would you handle someone not pulling their weight?
Well, first of all, I don't think that's really going to be the case. I don't envision a situation where one of the other selectmen on the board wouldn't be pulling their weight. I do agree with Ben that if that situation did arise, that it should be handled privately. I don't think there's any need to publicly embarrass someone. I don't think there's a need to show any disrespect for another selectman member. I think that any problems could be handled aside, and that hopefully that once you sat that person down, that they'd change their attitude. But again, I don't think that would be the problem in this case.
Now, obviously, Arlene, we know that Fred Royal and Ed Heafy are pulling their weight, but if in fact there were a select person that came on, or a selectman that came on the board that was not pulling their weight, how would you handle
I
it?
should say that was not a loaded question.
That's okay. I couldn't be more pleased with my colleagues on the Board of Selectmen. I'm very honored to work with both Fred and Ed. Each selectman has their own style, and it's not necessarily so that each of us put in the same amount of hours. I think the other gentlemen would agree. I have more free time than they do and tend to put in more time because I enjoy that, and that's my style. They certainly contribute an enormous amount to the Board of Selectmen. I wouldn't cut that down. But if there is a problem of any type in terms of personalities or perceived deficiencies, I think that ought to be handled privately, and hope that the person would recognize that and not run again. That certainly happened in the history of the town.
Great, thank you. Julie, your next question, I guess this comes from our viewing audience.
Yes.
Would you please address that to Attorney King?
Okay. Attorney King, this comes from Christopher Parzik of 234 Colony Road, and it's in regards to a proposal made by the school committee for user fees for sports. And he asks, what do you think about the $250 charge for playing sports?
Well, first of all, the students are already being assessed a fee of $48 per student per athletics. So there is already a fee being assessed students to participate in athletics. I do think that that $250 figure is a somewhat inflated figure and is designed in part to present a shock value. I think that all children should have the opportunity to actively participate in sports, and I think that if there is an alternative to charging such high fees, that those should be explored. Obviously, that's one of the concerns of the school department, and that's one of the reasons why they're proposing a Proposition 2.5 override. Whether or not that's going to be necessary in this case, I'm not certain, but I think that all students should be able to participate freely in sports.
Arlene?
The school committee certainly is in a difficult position now, trying to devise a budget next year when they're perceiving an enormous shortfall, and they're looking at any way that they can generate income. I think it is not a good policy, certainly, to charge $250 per sport. My son would cost him almost $1,000 to then in sports. If he decides to play 3 sports at the high school, that would be excessive, I think. There are other ways, perhaps, to attack that. There used to be booster clubs. There used to be sponsors of teams. Maybe this could be done in another fashion in order to still allow athletics to continue and not be a burden on the school budget. That would be my feeling, too, would be to explore other ways to generate revenue for athletics other than just using a $250 charge per sport. Although I have to say that I do sympathize with the school committee and recognize that they are in a very difficult position with the programs that they're trying to maintain.
That current proposal, just as sort of an overview, that current proposal, right now you mentioned the $48, that caps out depending on the number of children. Would the $250 proposal, would that cap out? Or would there be no cap? In other words, if you had 2 children who are playing 3 sports, would that mean that in your case you'd have to pay $2,000?
Yeah, all I've seen, and we have not yet met with the school committee in regard to this, and of course they have control over their total budget anyhow in terms of the bottom line. But I have not read any more about it than you've reported in the paper, and I don't understand it to cap out, except that it would be $250 per sport.
That was part of a budget plan that was submitted for printing requirements for the town meeting warrant. It's not a final thing.
No, we've decided actually that we're not going to try to print the budget necessarily. We're going to hold off on some things until a later date so that we have more time for dialogue, because this has been such a difficult budget season. So you're right, those were some artificial deadlines.
Okay, and Ben, your response to the question.
Well, I agree. This is a very sports-oriented town. It's a very community-oriented town. We've got, right now, we've got a basketball team that looks like it's going to go to have a very successful season.
Beating Westfield as we speak.
We hope.
Yeah, right, which we all want to go see right now. And
Not until we finish all the issues.
all right.
Dedication.
Let's go quick. But it's a $250 fee per child, per sport, per season. Could get excessive. I've got 3 children. As Arlene says, her children would be close to 1,000. Mine would be close to 1,000. I don't want to see that happen, and I don't think it would happen. But as Arlene brought up, there were booster clubs. There are booster clubs in many communities around the country. That would be a way to handle a situation like that.
Okay, great. Julie, you have a question from the viewing audience, or you want to ask another one of your questions?
Yeah, I have one more of my questions.
Okay, why don't you start with Mrs. Miller?
Mrs. Miller. At a recent selectmen meeting, you said something to the effect of the residents of Longmeadow want everything, but they don't want to pay for anything. That might not be a quote, but it was something like that.
It's pretty close.
Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yes, I think it's human nature to want to get all you can and pay as little as you can. And government in our country, I believe, historically, or at least has evolved into doing a lot for the citizens. And people have become used to things being provided by the government. And that's been costly. It's been costly on the federal level, on the state level, and certainly on the local level. We're seeing all the way down from the federal to the state to the local that we can't keep generating more money to support these services. People are going to have to start to do things for themselves in order to have the quality of life that they want. Okay. Government cannot continue to do everything for people.
Ben, I guess this would have to be a generic application just from your own assessment of the community. Do you feel that that is a proper assessment, that the general consensus is that they want everything and aren't willing to pay for it?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's a general consensus. They're not willing to pay for it. Yes, they're willing to pay for it, but not in a major way. I think, it's going to come down to whether the town is going to decide whether they want services and programs or if they want lower taxes. At this point, I'm not sure whether or not we're going to be able to do both.
Okay. Matt?
Well, I think that the town does pay for its services through its taxes. And it's not a question of not wanting to pay for something, it's a question of whether or not they want to pay more for what's presently being provided. I think that we owe the townspeople more respect than that, to say, hey, they don't want to pay for something. I think we have to ask them, explain to them, if that's the situation, that we can't continue to provide these services at the current tax rate, and that if you want the same level of services or you want improved level of services, we're going to have to start exploring alternatives. And I think, again, we have to get the town's input in that regard.
Great, thank you. Okay, Julie, you have a call or a question from one of our callers.
Yes.
And please address that to Ben Russell.
Okay, this one is directed to Mr. Russell.
How appropriate.
It's from Michael Capola from 33 Western Drive. And he asks, are you aware of the Regional Traffic Planning Commissioner's report on traffic flow and potential public safety problem at the north end of Longmeadow Street, specifically at Forest Glen and Longmeadow Street?
No, I'm not aware of that study. I will become aware of it, though. I'll go out and look at it in the next few days to obviously get myself up to speed with the traffic problems and the studies that have been done. I know that there have been many studies made, and I haven't read them, but I will go out and make myself aware of the studies that have been done.
How about you, Matt? Are you aware of it?
No, I have to admit that I'm not aware of it. And as with Ben, I would certainly make every effort to make myself aware of it and analyze the study to see if in some way we're not doing what we should with respect to the traffic problems on Longmeadow Street.
Okay. Marlene, are you aware of it?
Acutely. No, aware of it. I've read it. I was part of the committee that reviewed it, certainly. There's also, Mr. Capola, Dr. Capola might be interested in knowing that the town has its services of storage engineers reviewing that light at that corner, the Converse Longmeadow light and the Laurel Converse light, to try to synchronize those lights to get better traffic flow through that corridor. And those recommendations will be coming in a couple of weeks from those engineers. And there are some timing changes that will be made.
Okay, Ford, you have another question from our audience.
Yes, I have a question from Leo Gadetti on Barrington Road. The question is...
Okay, please start with Mr. King, Attorney King.
Okay. The question is, how come the office buildings in town are taxed the same as the homeowner, which I guess he means residential properties? I think that's a matter that's dealt with by the Board of Assessors. And in making your answer, could you also say whether you feel it should be done differently, whether the very small amount of business owners in town should be taxed higher or lower than residences?
Well, I would have to state that I'm not certain why the businesses aren't taxed at a different rate than residential owners are. I know that in other communities that businesses are in fact taxed at a higher rate because of the higher property values and because of the revenues that they derive through operating their businesses. For some reason that's something that hasn't been done in this town. I don't know what amount of revenues could be generated by a different fee schedule. I think it's something that has to be taken a look at, and I haven't afforded myself the opportunity to do that yet, but I certainly plan on doing that. It's something that I talked about at a meeting that I was attending yesterday. I think it's something, given our dire financial situation as it's been explained to us, that it's something that we have to consider.
Thank you, Arlene.
The Board of Selectmen actually is the authority that sets the tax rate in terms of if it's going to be an even tax for the business and for residents. And the assessors, the Board of Assessors, give a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, and the Selectmen, after some dialogue with them, generally make that, it's their authority to make that decision. We have a classification now where they're taxed the same, business and the residents, and the reason is because about 96 or 97% of the property value in the community is residential, and a very small percentage, in fact, is business. And it's our feeling, and we analyze this every year and re-question it every August. The reason that we've kept it at an equal tax rate is because it would be an enormous burden on the small amount of businesses to shift the rate, and the revenue accrued from that would be very minor. And we felt that that would be a detriment to the businesses that are in Longmeadow and would not, in fact, do much to generate any revenue.
Ben?
I would have to look at the situation to make the determination. My gut feel is that, as Arlene said, 96, 97% of the revenue is coming from residential. But I do feel that the businesses should be taxed at a slightly higher rate. I think that it is their opportunity to be in business here in town. They are doing a lively business, or they wouldn't be here. And I think that it should be looked at and possibly have a change in the tax structure.
Thank you. Okay, Julie, you have another question from our audience, and please address it to Mrs. Miller first.
Okay, Madam Selectman.
Thank
This
you.
one is from Brewster Sturtevant from 82 Knollwood Drive. And he says, as Longmeadow has not accepted the National Flood Program, does non-acceptance help Longmeadow save the meadows as a floodplain? Or because of our non-acceptance, are we in danger of losing the meadows as a valuable natural resource?
I believe we have accepted that in the floodplain. I believe that's incorrect. And if I'm wrong, I don't mind being corrected. But it was a big campaign to accept that, and that was part of the floodplain zone amendment that was made some 5 or 6 years ago. And that was a big push by the Water and Sewer Department to have that zone, that area made a floodplain zone, and the floodplain plan, federal plan, to be implemented because of the interceptor sewer that was built through there. That was all part of the general package. That was important to the community. So I do believe that we have accepted that, and that those people are paying into that insurance program.
Okay, Ben?
I don't know one way or the other on that proposal or that plan that's come through. I would have to look into it.
Matt, do you have any input on that?
I'm not certain, but I believe that Mrs. Miller is correct when she said that the plan does, the town has accepted that plan, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. And finally, you have one last question forward from the audience, or is this your own?
I do have one more of my own I would like to ask.
Okay,
This is for Mr. Russell.
that's correct, right?
Do you have any specific proposals that you would like to make public at this point regarding the town's financial situation, separate from the things we've discussed already tonight? Any new way of looking at raising revenue, any new way of streamlining town operations, anything to raise some additional money or cut some fat somewhere in the town so we can cut down the size of any potential override?
Well, when you look at cutting fat, 87% of our current budget is salaries. We're locked into salaries of the school department, salaries of the fire department, salaries of the police department for at least another 2.5 years on a 6% increase per year. That's a nut that we're stuck with. Cutting out fat, when you're talking about 13% of the total budget, or 23% of the total budget, I'm sorry. No, 13% of the total budget that is actual programs, there's not a whole lot of fat that we can cut out. Longmeadow has historically been known as a very fiscally responsible town. We have a good reputation in Boston of being responsible for taking care of our needs in a responsible manner. Something has happened in the last few years where we're now all of a sudden in a very dire situation. And it has to be looked at, it has to be studied, it has to be, plans have to be made for now and for the long-range health of the community to get us back on track.
Matt?
I don't have any specific ideas in mind overall. Obviously, one possibility would be the proposed override of 2.5. That's not a very tasteful alternative. With respect to the town yard situation, maybe we can explore private funding of that project. Similarly with the town's library. There might be individuals or businesses out there that might be willing to contribute to the effort toward those projects. I think that we have to do our best to, again, maximize our state aid, to explore alternatives and come up with some unique financing, although I don't have anything concrete at this time.
Okay, and finally, Arlene?
The town is working on the budget and is in the budget process. I think one of the best things that we can do is to be in communication, as we are, with the school committee, the appropriations committee, and the Board of Selectmen, working together toward a unified approach toward the budget this year. This is a unique situation that we're all working so hard together. Costs have gone up. State mandates have gone up. That's one reason that we're in trouble. Communities throughout the Commonwealth are seeking overrides. Longmeadow is certainly not alone in the budget situation that we face, and residents ought to be aware of that. This is not unusual. We've done extremely well We've been able to maintain services under very strict restraints with Proposition 2.5 with only one override, and since Proposition 2.5 has been in effect. That's something to be proud of as a community. The community has these choices to make as to what services they want to maintain and how they want to pay for them, and there will be much dialogue, I'm certain, in the next several months between elected officials and the community when these decisions are being made.
Okay, thank you very much, candidates. Now, one of the things I think you've all seen tonight is there's been a lot of talk about overrides. There's been a lot of talk about the various services that we have here in Longmeadow, whether or not these services will be cut, whether or not some services will be increased. And obviously, if we do go to an override to Proposition 2.5, it's going to cost us taxpayers some additional taxes. What those additional taxes are, who knows? But one of the things I'm now going to ask the candidates to do is to make their closing statements. And one of the things that I'd like you to do, if possible, as part of your closing remarks, is based upon the parameters that we have right now. What do you see as the possible increase to our tax rates, percentage-wise, over the next, let's say, 18 months? And we'll start with you, Matt.
I'm not certain. It's becoming increasingly of an increasing concern to me, because a number that was thrown out was a 10% increase by Lou Allen not too many weeks ago. That would be planned on projected to raise $1.7 million. Well, now we're talking about the school department's request for $935,000 increase in their budget. That would require a larger than 10% increase in the town's tax levy limit. We're also talking about Proposition 2.5 overrides for the town yard, and as well as the school, center school, and as well as the town library. Those, if we do all of those proposed projects, we're going to be increasing our tax burden tremendously. And I think that we have to, as a Board of Selectmen, that we have to open up the lines of communication and recognize that it's the people that are going to make the choices, and they're difficult choices to make. But we're going to have to do everything we can to provide them with the information to make those difficult choices. And I think that that's one thing that I'm going to be proposing as a selectman, to get that information out to the public, rather than voice my own personal opinion in a strong fashion, present the facts, and have the public decide the information.
Thank you. And your closing remarks on the issue relative to the taxes, Ben?
Again, the tax situation is one that we're all concerned about. I don't want my taxes to go up. I'm sure you don't want your taxes to go up. But it's a situation that we're facing. We don't know what the true number is. As Mr. King said, the true figure has not been nailed down yet, whether it's 5%, 7%, 10%, 15%. We need to get that true number before we can make any determination as to what an actual amount is, if indeed an actual amount needs to be raised.
Okay. And do you have any other additional comments as closing statements? Okay. And finally, Madam Selectman?
Thank you. Could just call me Madam. I think it's also premature to give a number. I'm working hard on the budget process and intend to come up with as lean a budget that is palatable to the community as possible. And I think that the process is important, and we're in the middle of that. I've enjoyed this dialogue with the reporters and with yourself and with the candidates for Board of Selectmen, and I hope the viewing public has enjoyed it as well. I hope you're impressed with the complexity of the problems facing the town of Longmeadow and that the Board of Selectmen will have to deal with in the next 3 years. I'm convinced more than ever that it's important to have been familiar with how government works, and I think the experience that I've had on the Board of Selectmen and on other boards in the town makes me still the best candidate for this position, and I would encourage you to vote. Vote on February 14th, as I'm sure you'll encourage them, and I'll encourage you to vote for me.
Great. I thank you, Madam Selectman. I thank you, Ben Russell, Matt King. I also want to thank the two reporters, Julie Tippo and Ford Turner, for their insight tonight and their probing questions, and hopefully it has given all of you out there the chance of looking at the issues, exploring those issues with these candidates, and as I said, as I've reiterated several times throughout the show, very qualified candidates. And as Arlene ended, she said that February 14th is when you do make your decision. As I started the show by saying that you vote for various candidates, you will be voting for one of these persons on February 14th. That's next Tuesday. I do encourage you to get out and vote. I do encourage you to make sure that let your ideas come to the forefront. Don't sit back, in your house and say, well, I should have gone out and voted, and I really don't agree with these people. It's your decision to make. As all of these candidates have said to you tonight, it's your decision as a townsperson to have this town run appropriately. So I hope that on February 14th you go out, cast your vote for one of these fine candidates, and I'm sure that no matter which one you vote for, they'll do a job for you as a townspayer of Longmeadow, or as a taxpayer and a townsperson of Longmeadow. From my own perspective, Tom Foster, I want to thank you all for watching tonight. I want to thank Joe Curran for allowing us this time on his Talk of the Town. I want to thank Joyce Rosati and all the people who helped out tonight to make the show possible. So again, thank you for watching. Get out and vote on February 14th and cast your vote for one of these candidates. So this again is Tom Foster thanking you, and good night. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this special edition of Talk of the Town. My name is Tom Foster, and I want to thank Joe Curran for providing this special forum for you, the voter of Longmeadow, Massachusetts. Being a townsperson of Longmeadow right now, I'm rather excited because today I'm going to be able to participate in two very special events. First of all, as soon as I get through doing this broadcast and introducing the candidate forum, I'm going to be going down the Civic Center. I'm going to be doing the play-by-play of the Longmeadow Lancers versus the Putnam Beavers in the semifinals of the basketball championships. And I hope that after all of you have seen this debate, you get down and support our Lancers. So that's exciting for our town. And I think also another thing that's extremely exciting about our town this year is the wonderful candidates that have come out to seek the election to the various offices for the town of Longmeadow. We have a great race going on in the Selectmen's office, as well as the school committee, as well as the planning board. And I hope all of you get out and vote. And another thing I hope is I hope all of you support the League of Women Voters and what they stand for. I think they've done a nice job arranging this tonight, bringing you this public forum for you to express your views and your opinions and then seek the candidates' answers to some very probing questions. Also, I want to thank Channel 8 and Dwight Sturdivant and Connecticut Valley Productions for cooperation in bringing you this live forum, because things like this just don't happen overnight. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. Also, I want to thank Judy Kelly, because Judy Kelly will be the moderator. We're going to be going out to Judy in a few moments. Originally, I was going to be the moderator of this debate, but I think the League of Women Voters made a smart decision. They decided that someone outside of Longmeadow should be the moderator so there'd be totally no bias involved, and I respect their decision. And I don't think they could get a finer person to moderate this debate than Judy Kelly, because Judy is a former president of the League of Women Voters, and she'll do an outstanding job because she is an outstanding person. Now, when you watch this debate tonight, you know, speaking of bias, I hope every one of you who watches this discussion tonight between the candidates decide on your vote based upon the person that you see on the screen. I know oftentimes, you know, we hear that this person is backing that candidate and that person is backing another candidate. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. But the one person that's going to represent you, the voter of Longmeadow, is going to be the person that you're going to see answering questions tonight. So vote your conscience. Listen to what these candidates say. Not because of who they know, but who they are. And I think this is very important, because each one of these candidates brings something special, some special quality, and that's why they seek this office. And it's those qualities that are going to go on to lead you, the townspeople of Longmeadow, Massachusetts. And we couldn't ask for a better place to live. And I hope that after this debate's all over and after you've gone to the polls and made your decision, that everyone will come out as friends and we'll all join together to make Longmeadow, Massachusetts the place that we know it can be and the place that we want to live. Now, as we go out to the community house and we turn it over to Judy Kelly, again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters. I want to thank Joe Curran. And speaking of Joe, Joe has been in this town for many, many years. He's been through many political decisions, through many political elections. And after you've seen the debate, we're going to come back to Channel 8, and we're going to talk about some of the things that Joe, as a political observer, has seen in the debate, what some of his concepts are, what some of his ideas are relative to the things that we've seen discussed by the candidates tonight. As I said, we're going to hear from the selectmen, we're going to hear from the planning board, and then finally we're going to be hearing from the school committee. And as I said, each one of these candidates has something to say to you, the voter. So listen to them, listen to what they say, and make a vote that is based upon your decision on that person speaking directly to you, and vote your conscience, because the votes you cast will live with you for the next 3 to 5 years, depending on the office. So now we're going to go out to the community house. I'm going to turn it over to Judy Kelly. I wish all of the candidates the best of luck, and I hope the best person wins and represents our town in the fashion that we know they can, and us, the voters in the electorate of Longmeadow, want them to be. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, the League of Women Voters. Judy, I know you're going to do a great job, so let's go out to the community house and conduct our public forum for you, the voter. Thank you, and we'll be back after, myself and Joe Curran, to wrap it up and give you some of our comments. So this is your host, Tom Foster, with a special Talk of the Town going live to the community house in Longmeadow. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Tom and Joe. And now for this evening's program. My name is Ann Turnberg, and I'm president of the Greater Springfield Area League of Women Voters. I'd like to thank you all for attending this debate or watching on TV, and to introduce you to tonight's moderator, who is Judy Kelly, also a past president of the League of Women Voters, and to thank Channel 8 also for bringing you this program. And now, Judy.
Welcome to this evening's Candidates Forum. I'm Judy Kelly, and as Ann said, I'm a past president of the League of Women Voters of the Springfield area. The League is a nonprofit organization dedicated to political responsibility through informed citizen participation in government. There is information about the League of Women Voters as you leave the auditorium this evening, and I wish that you would pick up a brochure about the League. Tonight our forum will have 3 parts, with candidates for the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board, and the School Committee. The first section will have audience questions for the 2 candidates for Board of Selectmen. Your Board of Selectmen in Longmeadow has 3 members. One is elected each year for a 3-year term. The salary is $1,500. The selectmen are the chief elected officers of the town. They make recommendations to the residents through town meetings. The duties of the Board of Selectmen include supervisory control of all town officers and committees except the school committee. The 2 candidates running for Board of Selectmen in alphabetical order are Matthew King and Arlene Miller. The format for this section will be as follows. The audience will have 30 seconds to ask a question of the candidates. The candidates each will have 60 seconds to answer that question. We'll begin in alphabetical order with Mr. King answering the first question, and then we will rotate the answers. We ask that the candidates please watch our timers who are sitting in the front row, who will tell them when they have 15 seconds left to respond to the questions. I'd ask if there are people in the audience at this time that would like to ask questions of the candidates, if they would come forward to the microphones to ask their questions. Are there some questions from the audience? And the first question will go to Matthew King. And would you identify yourself?
Yes, I'm Joan Mott. I live at 45 Pinewood Drive. This is an extremely responsible position in this town. I would like to know what experience you bring to the job and what experience you feel is necessary to prepare for this job.
Mr. King.
Well, Joan, I bring to the job of selectman my experience as a lawyer, my experience as a resident in the community. I think, as I stated in my first article announcing my candidacy that my experience as a lawyer in dealing with complex legal matters would certainly be an extreme benefit in dealing with the town's issues. As a lawyer, you analyze the facts, you analyze the alternatives, and you come up with the best possible solution based upon the facts and the alternatives. And I think that that training will make me an ideal candidate for this position. And I think that my interest and my concern for the town and the town's future are also qualities that are going to help me as a select person.
Having been a member of the Board of Selectmen for 3 years, I can tell you without reservation that local town government is a very complicated business to run. I believe very firmly that in order to be an effective selectman, one must know how all departments run, how all boards run, what problems the community is wrestling with. And I think that my experience in the community prepares me extremely well to continue as a member of the Board of Selectmen. I've been a resident for 11 years. I've been active in the community as a committee member, most notably the Recycling Commission, for 7 years before I was a member of the Board of Selectmen. I was active on other commissions and board, involved with the schools, and involved in other areas of the town as well. I think it's absolutely necessary in order to be able to pull upon the resources that are available in the town in order to make good decisions, to solve problems, to have experience within the town and in the town government.
Thank you very much. Do we have another question from the audience? If there are questions to the candidates from the audience, you may line up at the microphones at this time, and we'll just call on you as you are there. Do we have another question? Yes, sir.
My name is Joe Curran. My question is to Arlene Miller.
Yes.
Arlene, one of the real problems, probably, of obligations of an officer or holder of elective office or whatever, is integrity. Doing something that you promised to do. In 1986, we had an override. That override was promoted by the selectmen in a very vigorous kind of fashion. You said that it would be for 1 year only. At the end of the year, we wrote you a letter and asked you to honor that commitment of a 1-year override, and you refused. If you're re-elected to office, if you make a commitment, will you honor it?
Let me clarify your question. I've got 60 seconds. When we said it's a 1-year override only, that's by law, sir. When you vote for a 2.5% increase in the tax base as an override, by law you may only increase the base that much more for 1 fiscal year. Yes, you accrue some benefit from that because you increase the base. That year we had 2 successful questions on the override, as you'll recall, 3 actually. 1 for a straight 2.5% override, and 2 questions that gave us bonded indebtedness exclusion. That exclusion lasts through the life of the bond. We are still gaining some benefit from one of the exclusion questions from that override, but the 2.5% increase is finished after 1 year. That's the law.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. That question was directed to Mrs. Miller, but would you, Mr. King, like to respond, or would you like to address Proposition 2.5 or the override?
I think I'd like to respond to Mr. Kern's question. I think in part what he's suggesting is that it was announced as a 1-year commitment by the town to override 2.5, and Mrs. Miller is right. It raises the tax base for that first tax year, but at that time the tax base remains the same, and then any additional tax increases for the following year start from that base. So I think that that's what Mr. Curran is addressing. I think that as a candidate facing the problem of Proposition 2.5, my position has been that we have to further investigate it, that as persons on the Board of Selectmen, we have an obligation to everybody in this town to make sure that before an override is brought to the town's vote, which I think it should be, that the issue is investigated by an independent committee that's designed to examine the facts and present the facts to the townspeople so that the townspeople, as they should, decide the issue and not the Board of Selectmen or any of the other committees in town.
Thank you very much. Do we have another question from the audience? Thank you. And your question will be addressed first to Mr. King.
Yes. My name is Larry Starr, and I also live here in town. My question deals with the concern that I have about what appears to be some sort of a perhaps animosity or a lack of cooperation between the 2 major operations in our town, the school committee and the selectmen. And could you comment on why there seems to be this diversion between the two organizations that should be working together to produce an overall result that the townspeople can live with and be happy with?
Well, not being part of that process yet, I mean, actually communicating directly between the boards, I can't state specifically what the problems are. I think certainly that as a select person, as a board of selectmen, they have an accountability to the town and not just to the school department, so there might be some friction caused in that respect. I think also personalities play a part in it. And I think that as an effective select person, the person has to have an ability to communicate and respect people's ideas and be able to engage in a cooperative effort so that the best ultimate goal is achieved, and that is to make sure that we confine ourselves within the budget if we can, and if we can't, then find alternatives and explain the facts to the people in a way that they're not going to feel that they've been railroaded into any particular decision. I think that I would bring in an effective ability to communicate and try to help the school department in whatever way I can, although they're an autonomous group and I wouldn't have direct control over the school department, certainly.
Thank you. Mrs. Miller.
I think your question's a good one and certainly has received considerable press of late. I want to say at this point that my opponent is saying that we should be doing things that we're not doing or making those kinds of suggestions, and I want you to understand that that reflects his lack of involvement and lack of understanding of the process that's occurring presently within the community. You're right, we need to make all kinds of strides to work well with every board and commission in this town. The school committee, selectmen, and appropriations committee are working on this steering committee that we formed to work on the budget. It's been an exciting process. We met Monday night and worked together, working toward a goal for the town to keep the budget figures low, to do what we can to maintain services within the budget. It was an exciting exchange between the two boards. Both boards, I believe, are making progress. We can all do better, but we are making progress, and I agree with your suggestions 100% on that.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Miller. Do we have any more questions from the audience? All right. In the event that we do not, and it appears that we don't, we will ask our panel of reporters to ask a few questions to the candidates for selectmen. Our reporters this evening are Mr. Ford Turner, who represents the Springfield Union News, and Ms. Julie Tippo, who represents Longmeadow News. Mr. Turner, would you have a question first for Mrs. Miller?
Sure. This question can be answered by both candidates, I think. Do you feel the fiscal 1990 budget process has moved along at a timely pace thus far? And if it hasn't, or if it has, whatever you're feeling, what aspects of the budget preparation could be improved upon or changed next year and in the following years?
I think it's been a difficult budget process. It always is difficult when you have more things you'd like to do than you have money to do, and that's certainly the situation we found ourselves in under Proposition 2.5. I'm excited about the increased communication between the school committee and the selectmen, and I think that's been an improvement. I think that's a good thing to the process. I think we can improve by doing more planning for facilities and needs, and we're working on that with our managers, with our department heads, to try to have a long-term picture of what the community needs. So in terms of the budget process, I think that will be helpful. We've explored this year many more ways of raising revenue. The selectmen are exploring, trying to maximize every avenue for user fees that we can legitimately without putting an unfair burden on the community. That's taken time. I believe we're doing a good job, and by April 1 we'll have some solid figures and plenty of time for community input and dialogue well in advance of the annual town meeting.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. Mr. King, would you like to respond to that question?
Well, I think there has been a problem in the way that the budget has come to the public's attention, and I think what was first identified in early December, or projected in early December, was a shortfall of $168,000. That shortfall rose from that figure to a figure of approximately $300,000. In the end of January, a projection of a shortfall of about $600,000, and then the school department itself in its budget was talking about $735,000 of a shortfall with respect to the school's budget. I think that certainly that the process has to be examined very, very carefully, and I think that there has to be an independent look at each of the town's budget. I have been very vocal of late about the process, this, quote, steering committee, and I think that at that meeting between all three bodies in town, it was decided that the goal of the committees were to override 2.5, and that the purpose of the committee should be made clear to the committee members to achieve that goal. And I think that that's a wrong purpose.
Thank you, Mr. King. Ms. Tippo, would you address a question to Mr. King?
Well, Mr. King, my question did deal with the steering committee, so maybe you could expand on that more. I was wondering if you were both satisfied with the formation and the startup, since it has met for the first time.
Well, as you know, Julie, I submitted a comment to you and to Ford Turner about the steering committee. And to be honest with you, it took me quite by surprise at the three-way meeting between the Board of Selectmen, the Appropriations Committee, and the School Committee, that without talking specifically about figures, which they weren't willing to do, the question was raised, well, are we going to need an override? And Lou Allen said, until the cherry sheets come in, we don't know what the shortfall is going to be. We don't know if we're going to need an override. We suspect that we will. In spite of that lack of knowledge as to the specific facts, the comment was raised by one of the select persons that we have to form a committee whose goal it is going to be to override Proposition 2.5, and we have to make them aware that their purpose is going to be to market a 2.5 override. I'm in favor of a committee, but I think the committee should be a fact-finding body who's going to present the facts to the townspeople in a neutral way so that the townspeople, as they should, vote on the issue.
Thank you, Mr. King. Mrs. Miller, would you respond to that question?
This is incredibly enlightening, having been at that meeting myself and was co-chairing it sort of with Mr. Bruslin. That was the first time I saw Mr. King at a selectman meeting, and I was glad he was able to come that evening. I think he is representing the meeting entirely wrong, and I know you can check your notes, and the minutes are public record, that we in fact did say we would form a steering committee. The steering committee was to formulate numbers so that we could decide if we needed an override or if there was a shortfall. Then we were to form a citizens advisory committee to advise us as to what to do, how to approach the community with that shortfall if there in fact were one. I'd also like to remind Mr. King that there is an independent citizens advisory committee very active in the community called the Appropriations Committee, which is appointed by the moderator to do just that, look over everybody's budget and be responsible to the citizens.
Thank you very much. Mr. Turner, will you address the question to Mrs. Miller?
Mrs. Miller, looking into the future, do you think the character and lifestyle of Longmeadow will change due to Proposition 2.5 and the associated financial problems it's been creating?
It's a really good question. Thank you. I think there are a lot of pressures, certainly on the community now and on the character because of financial demands and growth in the community. We as selectmen are looking for ways to maintain that character. We may have to do services differently. We may have to approach several aspects of the community in a different way. One of my goals would be to maintain the character of the town the best we can, to maintain the qualities of schools, the quality of life, the open space, the basic functions within the community, to still be able to provide basic services to our citizens. I think there will be some changes. I don't see it being drastic if we're all sure of what we want to preserve. And I think the challenge of the elected officials is to be able to listen to what the community wants to preserve and work hard toward that goal.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. Mr. King, would you like to respond to that question?
Ford, I think certainly that the Proposition 2.5 has required people throughout the country and in this state as well and in this town as well to change their lifestyles. We have to change the budgetary process. No longer can we be not fiscally responsible. We have to be aware of every dollar that's spent in town, and we have to, as a group of people, explore every possible alternative to come up with financing and to make sure that the money is being spent in the appropriate way. I think that overcoming the limitations of 2.5 require a monumental effort on the part of all the townspeople, and I think it requires input on the part of all townspeople. And as a person running for the office of selectman, I'm going to try to make sure that everybody in town gets involved in the process. And I think that one of the best things that I can bring to the community is my ability to communicate and seek the opinions and advice of others. And I think that I'm going to try to do that.
Thank you. We have time now for just one more question, and Ms. Tippo, would you like to address that question first to Mr. King?
Okay, Mr. King, I was wondering if you could tell me what role you think the Board of Selectmen should play in the center school and library projects.
I have been advocating throughout my campaign, Julie, that I perceive the Board of Selectmen's role to be a very neutral role. In the town form of government, it's the townspeople that vote on almost every issue. It's not a city form of government where you have a city council or a mayor that controls and that decides the issue. It's the townspeople. So what I perceive the role of the selectmen is to find out alternatives, find out what the issues are. In this case, you have an issue of the town yard, you have an issue of the center school, you have the issue of the library, and you have the issue of the overall town budget. And I think my duty would be to find the facts on each one of those issues, present the issues to the townspeople, and have the people decide. I think that they should be made aware of the impact of all of those projects at once and how each of the individual projects are going to impact on their individual lifestyles. And that would be my perception of the role as a select person in that process.
Mrs. Miller, would you respond?
The selectmen have already been involved and have been involved continually in both those projects. The Center School Study Committee reports to the Board of Selectmen regularly, and the selectmen have met frequently with the Stores Library Board of Trustees regarding the project so that we're kept in tune with everything that's going on. What we've done is take an initial step by appointing members of the Center School Study Committee and the Library Board to the steering committee so that there's dialogue all the time immediately between those bodies that are seeking extra funds and the Board of Selectmen Appropriations Committee and the school committee as we're designing budgets. And as their plans and requests for more money from the community become formulated, they'll be right in tune and communicating. And that's the role I see the Board of Selectmen playing, is acting as mediators and helping people to communicate and make things happen. The final decision certainly would be the town meeting, and the public, especially if it's an override vote, it would be a vote of the total town.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. The candidates will now have 1 minute and 15 seconds for a closing statement, and we'll ask Mr. King to speak first. We'll do this in alphabetical order. Mr. King.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the people in this community who have welcomed my candidacy for the Board of Selectmen. I think that those people who know me very well were surprised by the fact that I decided to run for this office, but they're not surprised by my commitment to change in this town. And the reason why I've decided to run for this office of select person is because I think there's a drastic need for a change in this town. I'm not pleased personally, and in going door to door and talking to people, I know that there are a lot of people who are not pleased with the way things are being done in this town. The town yard override question is one example. The question of the present override situation, with the general override being discussed, is another situation. There are 63% of the people that voted at the primary that voted for a change on the Board of Selectmen. Certainly I'm not responsible for 455 people coming out and voting on my behalf. There are those people that believe that there's a need for a change and that they believe that I'm going to be the most worthy candidate. And I'd ask for your continued support in my effort to become a select person.
Thank you, Mr. King. Mrs. Miller.
I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for holding this forum and for encouraging informed citizen participation in government, because that's really what it's all about. I've been a member of the Board of Selectmen for 3 years, and I came to that position as having been an active citizen in the community. I thought when I approached the board that I was really qualified, because, boy, I've been active and I knew a lot of things about how the town worked. As a member of the board, however, I learned an enormous amount in the 3 years I've served on the board. It's a complicated position. It's one that requires experience. It requires knowing how the Conservation Commission works, how the school committee works, how the moderator works. You must know that in order to be able to pull out resources to solve problems within the community. Local town government is complicated. Proposition 2.5 makes it more complicated. We have local issues, we have regional issues. We have issues between neighbors that the board gets involved in. I believe this is a time in our history of our town when we need leadership on the Board of Selectmen. We need experienced leadership. It's not a time for novice politicians. It's a time when you as a community need to have experienced leaders. And I would hope that you would vote for that experience on March 14th by voting for me.
That concludes section 1 of our forum this evening. I'd like to thank the candidates for Selectman Mr. King and Mrs. Miller, and I'd like to ask that the candidates for Planning Board please come forward. Section 2's presentation tonight will involve the Planning Board. The Planning Board in Longmeadow has 5 members. One is elected each year for a 5-year term. They serve without compensation. The Planning Board operates under the zoning laws of the state and the zoning bylaws of the town of Longmeadow. It must approve all zone changes and all plans for subdivisions and developments, and it oversees these plans. The 2 candidates for Planning Board in alphabetical order are Mr. Joel Dolce and Mrs. Eileen Sorrentino. They will each give a 3-minute presentation, and we'll do that in alphabetical order. First, Mr. Dolce.
I think we agreed on doing it a different way.
You did. Well, good enough. Then we'll allow Mrs. Sorrentino to begin. Thank you.
My name is Eileen Sorrentino. I live in Glenbrook Lane, and I have lived there for 14 years with my husband and 3 daughters. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for this opportunity to address the town. I'm a practicing attorney with the firm of Egan, Flanagan & Egan, and I have been active in community life for the whole time I've been in Longmeadow. I'm a past president of the PTO. I'm active in the League of Women Voters. I was member of the Children's Profile Task Force for the Office for Children, and I've been appointed to different town committees in town over the years. Presently, I am on the Planning Board as an appointed member, filling the unexpired term of Jerry Gold. I was appointed by the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board. I want this position on the Planning Board because I think it's an important one. People say to me that there's nothing to do on the Planning Board, there's no land left in the town, but that's really not the case. We're at a critical juncture. We have very little land, and we have needs in the town. We have a critical need to preserve open space for the future, because once we have used up all the land, once it's developed, there will be no going back. You can't take things off land and get back the green space that we want. I strongly support a master plan in the town. Different committees and groups in town are looking at town resources from their points of view. The selectmen, the Conservation Commission, the Historical Commission, Parks and Recreation, and of course the school department are all looking at the land and the needs of the town. I think it makes sense for the Planning Board to be the coordinating group, to take all of the ideas and the needs and to coordinate them into one master plan. Now, the role of the Planning Board is twofold. We analyze and review subdivision plans according to the statute that's provided by the state and our own bylaws. There's very little discretion in that area. But in the area of making a master plan and recommending zoning for the town, that's the discretionary part of the Planning Board's job, and it's the part I think that really needs doing. We've begun that task on the Planning Board now, and I'd like to have the opportunity to continue it. I think the time is now to do what we need to do to preserve the character of our town. Longmeadow is important to all of us. That's why we're here. I hope you'll all come out and vote on March 16th. Thank you. 14th. I'm sorry. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sorrentino. Mr. Dolce, would you please give your remarks?
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Good evening. Thank you very much for showing interest in our town's elected offices. My name is Joe Dolce. I'm a candidate for the Town Planning Board, as has been stated. I've lived at 94 Academy Drive for the past 16 years with my wife, Mary, and our 5 children. We moved to Longmeadow for the quality of life and superior educational opportunity it offered. I'd like to first thank the League of Women Voters for organizing this very informative candidates night, also Channel 8 and Connecticut Valley Productions for their excellent coverage of events that concern our town. I've decided to run for the Planning Board because I feel this is a time in our history when our town is rapidly using up its available land, that we on the Planning Board should use our best judgment in choosing uses for that land. I want to see all of our open land, both public and private, put to its best possible use for the benefit of all our citizens. We are currently confronted with a major expansion of our library and need desperately to build a new town yard. I pledge to look into these projects, particularly the town yard, to see that they are done in the most cost-effective way while giving our town the value it needs in these projects. Excuse me. It is my understanding that this building, which is approximately 30,000 square feet, has been priced at approximately $3 million. An architect and 2 reputable builders, upon overview of the plan, have concluded that under no circumstances should the building cost more than $50 a square foot, not the $100 a square foot as suggested by the preliminary study authorized by the Board of Selectmen and chaired by my opponent. I also intend to work vigorously to help Longmeadow meet state guidelines for affordable housing while keeping our town the best residential community in western Massachusetts. Construction of affordable housing would mean that our senior citizens, many of whom are on a fixed income, could be provided with housing, allowing them to stay in the town they've spent 20, 30, or sometimes 40 years in. We could also attract young married couples who currently cannot afford to get started in a town like ours, giving them the same opportunity many of us had when we were younger and housing was more affordable. I'd like to thank you very much for your time and attention, and I would appreciate your support for the Planning Board on March 14th. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dulce and Mrs. Sorrentino, and we'll take some time now for a promotional break.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tom Foster, and I'm on the Board of Directors of Channel 8. I hope you're enjoying the viewing that you're seeing this evening, the program that you're seeing this evening. But without your support and without your help, we won't be able to bring you these important issues that affect our town. And I know myself, having been involved now with Channel 8 for 3 years, I've been able to bring you football, lacrosse, wrestling, basketball, both men and women's basketball, field lacrosse, field hockey for the women, and various sports like this. And a lot of times people say to me, gee, Tom, I wish that you could do my child's sport, my child's particular event. But unfortunately, these programs that are brought to you on Channel 8 have to be funded. Someone has to be paid to go out and do those programs. From my own perspective, I volunteer my time. But the other people that provide you with these programs have to be paid. And without your support, we can't pay them and we can't bring you these very vital programs for our community well-being. Now, besides the athletic events that I'm involved in with Channel 8, I'm also involved in with Joe Curran and Joyce Rosati on Talk of the Town. And Talk of the Town has been very important to you, the taxpayer of Longmeadow, because Joe Curran, in his probing way, has gotten to the important issues that are affecting you, the taxpayer, so that you have the opportunity of going to that ballot booth and making the right decision for you and for our town. And without this ability of exploring these issues, you'd have to go to town meetings. You'd have to go to the school committee yourself. You'd have to go to the Board of Selectmen's meeting. But Channel 8 brings you those programs. They allow you to sit in your own living room and listen to what the school committee's talking about, listening to all this talk relative to override, listening to what the Board of Selectmen are dealing with. And without Channel 8, you'd actually have to go there yourself and participate. So Channel 8 allows you to do that. Also, for your younger children, we have Book Nook, we have Learning with Laney, and these are all very important in a child's developmental and learning process. And these are the types of things that make Channel 8 what it is. But again, without your support, without your money, Channel 8 will not be able to bring you these programs. Now, last year, we ran a telethon, and we'll be doing it again this year. And in that telethon, all we asked for you, the viewing audience, was to contribute $1 a month. Now, I know with the override coming, with new town yards, and with center school, you know, coming to you and asking you for money is something that maybe we shouldn't be doing. But maybe we shouldn't be bringing you these important programs. Maybe we shouldn't allow your children access to public TV. And that's what Channel 8 is all about. So all we're asking for is $1 a month. And it won't hurt because that can be put on your Continental Cablevision bill. And if you stop and think about it, how many of you that are watching tonight's program have watched any programs on Channel 8? And you should feel guilty if you are watching this program and you haven't contributed that $1 a month. Do you realize there are 4,000 viewing audience that are actually hooked up to Continental Cablevision? And of that 4,000 viewing audience, only 10% of you, 400 people, actually contribute that $1 a month. And if you're not part of that one person, that $1 a month, that 10%, you should feel guilty about watching Channel 8. We'd like to bring you all sorts of programs here on Channel 8. But in order for us to do that, we have to have the funds to do so. Now, this year, we are going to be running another program in the early part of June, another telethon. Last year, as part of the telethon program, I went out and went into the community. We first of all gave you the chance of seeing the outgoing police chief and listening to Rick Marquis, our new police chief, and what his viewpoints are going to be on public safety here in Longmeadow. We also had the opportunity of having live in the studio Ed Heafy, the new selectman, and got Ed's ideas on what was going to affect our town in the long haul. Also, how many of you have actually gone out into our parks here in Longmeadow and taken advantage of the services that the park department provides? Well, another thing we did as part of the telethon, we actually went out with Harry Reynolds and we saw the parks. We listened to the services that we provide you as a taxpayer. We also were able to interview a vast and sundry array of people on all the various topics that affect you, the taxpayer of Longmeadow. Also, we were able to do live acts with some of the children of our town. And again this year, if you have any children or yourself that are interested in participating in this telethon, you have an act, you have a gripe to grieve, come on to Channel 8 during our telethon and we'd be happy to air that. And during that telethon, again, we're going to be asking you for just $1 a month. Stop and think about it. $1 a month to continue with all these programs that Channel 8 has provided you with. So we ask you to participate in the telethon. We ask you to participate in our program, only $1 a month. And by doing so, we'll be able to continue to bring you the programs such as the one that you're seeing here tonight. So please, I ask you as a board of directors, as a fellow citizen, as a fellow taxpayer, and someone who really enjoys being involved with yourselves, being involved with your children, being involved in all the athletics and talk of the towns, because I feel a need for Channel 8. I feel a need for the programs that Channel 8 can bring to you. So again, I beseech you, if you can just give us $1 a month, and again, that can be billed directly through Continental Cablevision, put on your monthly bill, you'll never feel it coming out of your pocket. But the dollar that you don't feel coming out of your pocket can help subsidize a lot of these programs that we like to bring you here on Channel 8. And one of the things that a lot of parents ask me, they say, well, you know, Tom, we've got this event happening in my child's school. Would it be possible for Channel 8 to film it? Well, one of the things that we're thinking about here at Channel 8, if we can raise some additional funds, we are thinking about having a part-time person whose sole responsibility will be going around the town and filming various events throughout the schools and throughout the various communities. So if you have a child who's, let's say, for example, going to be involved in a school play, at Williams Middle School, at Center School, at Blueberry Hill, no matter what it is, if you contact us here at Channel 8, and we do have that part-time person who's available, we'll send them out to film that. And this is unique to our Longmeadow community. So let's keep it unique. Let's keep this going. Let's keep it flowing. And you can do that with that $1 a month. So I ask you again, from the bottom of my heart to the bottom of your heart, if you can give us that $1, then we can provide programs like this and keep the quality of life here in Longmeadow and the quality of you, the viewing audience, up to where it should be. So again, this is Tom Foster, thanking you. Enjoy the program that you're seeing tonight, and let's continue to see these types of programs. Thank you, and enjoy the programs.
Good evening and welcome back. The third part of our forum this evening will concern the members of the school committee that are running for election. The school committee has 6 members. 2 are elected each year for a 3-year term. They serve without compensation. The school committee is a policy-making board for the school system. They set policy and oversee the administration of those policies. The 4 candidates for school committee in alphabetical order are Mr. Richard Bruslin, Mrs. Patricia Colleton, Mrs. Liz Kittredge, and Mr. Richard Tariff. The format for this section will include 2 parts. The first part will be questions from our panel of reporters to the candidates, and the second section will be audience questions to our candidates. We ask that the candidates please observe the time limits that the timers will show you in the front row of the audience. And I'd like to introduce our panel of reporters for those of you that haven't tuned into this forum beforehand. Our reporters this evening are Miss Julie Tippo from the Longmeadow News and Mr. Ford Turner from the Springfield Union News. And we'll begin with a question from Miss Tippo, and she will ask that question to Mr. Bruslin first.
Mr. Bruslin, as you know, at a recent school committee meeting, a freshman lacrosse team was set up, and it was with the stipulation that user fees and the club's booster club would support that club. A $250 user fee for students has been mentioned as a possible cost for next year. And I was wondering with this situation if you think that booster clubs or businesses should take a role in supporting our sports.
Mr. Brislin, you have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you. Certainly, public education would like to be able to pay for itself and not have to go out into the community to raise funds. The figure of $250 came about when we looked at our budget and said that if we had to take out sports from the budget and then had to pay for them by, if they were to be paid for, if we are to have sports, that the students would have to pay, and when we multiplied out the figures, the $250 came out to be the cost of what it would be. There are many parents in town who have given a lot of time and effort to our various sports activities, and unfortunately, if in fact an activity has to be curtailed, and that is the only way that it can be paid for, I think we have to take a strong look at those possibilities. We are hopeful, however, that the $250 user's fee is not going to become a reality. That was based on the fact that we may have had...
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Brislin. Your answer to that question, Mrs. Colleton.
Thank you. I think the $250 fee is one of a parade of horribles that we ought not be considering at this time. It has been my position throughout this campaign that before we take drastic steps of that sort and before we go to the community and ask for a raise in taxes, we ought to, number one, coordinate the school and the town budget, and number two, audit the school budget itself. Neither of those steps have been taken this year, and to consider dropping sports or charging $250 without the school committee leadership taking the time and effort to review its own in-house budget and to work closely with the selectmen, not just for a first meeting this Monday, but last September, October, November, December, to work closely to coordinate those budgets is outrageous. I do feel, in answer specifically to your question, that the superintendent should have control of sports rather than private parent groups.
Thank you, Mrs. Colleton. Mrs. Kittredge, will you respond to that question?
Ever since 2.5, the school committee's been faced with all kinds of cuts in the budget. Most of them really haven't been very noticeable. Deferred maintenance, not purchasing textbooks, things like that. People don't see. We've cut and cut and cut till we're really down to the bare bones. And this year the Appropriations Committee came to us and said, there still isn't enough money to even level fund your budget. So we looked at possible cuts. We are a school system. The job is first and foremost to educate the children. How could anybody think about cutting academics before sports? I'd love to see a full extracurricular activities going on in the schools. It's wonderful for the children. But on the other hand, if the only way of having extracurricular activities is by users' fees, then it's something that really has to be implemented, because by state law, we cannot charge for supplies or textbooks. Sports and after-school activities are one of the few places where people who use the activity pay for it.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Tariff, will you respond?
Thank you. I think my major concern is that we have to take our budget within our school system and start at zero and develop an entire zero-based budgeting system where we're looking at every item and every program and reviewing it. Businesses and families and community members supporting projects within schools is common across the nation. The jargon for that is called partnerships in education, and that's occurring in many, many different places where different businesses adopt schools, associations adopt programs, and so forth. But I'm concerned that if we continue to have these type of charges for activities, it's really going to hinder the complete program within our school system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question will be asked by Mr. Turner, and he will ask it first to Mrs. Colleton.
Mrs. Colleton, and Mr. Tariff, since you're all going to be responding to this, could you tell us how you feel about the creation of the steering committee? Do you think it's the best way to move towards the resolution of the town's financial problems? And Mr. Bruslin and Mrs. Kittredge, since you supported the formation of the committee, will you attend its meetings, and are you satisfied with the creation of it and the progress that's begun. Mrs. Collison.
Well, the committee was formed, and I too was at that infamous meeting at which it was formed. The committee was formed and has had its very first meeting 2 days ago. I don't think a great deal of progress has been made at this point. I think the concept of a committee that puts the selectmen working with the school committee is excellent and is exactly what needs to be done. My concern is with a budgeting process that waits until we are locked into sending pink slips to our teachers, locked into dismissing almost 10% of our teaching staff before we have the first meeting of the selectmen and the school committee. So that I find it a laudable idea. Certainly we need to work together. Certainly it's time now to review efficiencies that could be undertaken to reduce the cost of the school budget, such as, general supply purchasing, ground maintenance, snow plowing. All these services could be coordinated.
Thank you, Mrs. Colleton. Mrs. Kittredge, would you respond to that?
Sure. Yes, I will attend the meetings of the steering committee because Mr. Bruceland and I volunteer to be the school committee people who are on the steering committee. I've also volunteered to be on quite a few other committees. Being on the school committee is more than an every other Monday night commitment. As we discuss the steering committee, there's a lot of work that's going to be done. Looking at the figures, getting input from all over town, and in my mind, one of the things that happened 4 years ago was bringing in former appropriation committees people who are familiar with the town budget and have a good understanding and know what to look for, where the monies are being spent, and have them look over the work that this year's appropriations committee has done and see what's happening. There are certain things that can't be decided right away. Our hands are tied. The 1st of January, we were told to expect the amount of state, the cherry sheet, which is how much state aid we will get, by March 1st. It's not here. The state is nowhere near doing their budget work.
Thank you, Mrs. Kittredge. Mr. Tariff, will you respond?
Thank you. In the past 16 years that I've been in education, I've been dealing with school committees in many different facets. And as I was a negotiator for teacher associations and for administrator groups, and as I developed budgets within the schools and presented it to the school committees, one of the things that was always present at these major meetings was a member of the town selectmen or town council, whatever community that I was in. I think it's essential when we're dealing with major budget issues that there is some type of continuous communication between the school committee and the selectmen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Bruceland, your answer.
Thank you. I certainly wouldn't characterize it as an infamous meeting. I think the issue of the steering committee was a very, very serious matter which certainly had to be taken up, and certainly a proper matter. To answer the question with respect to our participation, yes, certainly we will. The school committee followed its procedure with respect to preparing a budget, following similarly a pattern which was established many years ago and which was followed over the last 15 years that I was on the committee. We prepared our budget. We rely on the appropriations committee to prepare certain figures for us, being their responsibility, and we met our deadline. The problem that we have with budgets year in and year out is the one that Mrs. Kittredge alluded to, and that is a problem of not knowing what the bottom line is. And is a problem which we've faced before. I'm sure it's going to be a problem that we face again. You cannot have your household budget and know what to spend if you don't know what the money is. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question will be for Mrs. Kittredge, and Ms. Tippa, would you address that question, please?
Mrs. Kittredge, the health education program for the schools is on a list of possible cuts. If that program should be eliminated next year, do you know who that responsibility would be left to for teaching the children about health education?
There's several different possible ways it can be picked up. One way is the way it's partly being done now in the high school. Freshmen and sophomores take phys ed 3 times a week, but once a week is set aside for health education, and the phys ed teachers have been trained to do that. So one way of including health education would be to educate the phys ed teachers to do some of the health education. It's not the way that I would like to do. It's not adequate. It's not enough. The children really need more, but they would not be without any health education because it's too important, a part of their being prepared for the future and understanding the problems that they'll face. Because people may not know, health education includes substance abuse, wellness, things like that, respect for the body. It's not just, running around or learning how the body works or where babies come from. It's a lot more than that.
Thank you. Mr. Tariff addressed that question.
Health education is exceedingly important in our schools, and I will be a firm believer to continue that program. I have real questions and concerns when we're running 9 classes at Longmeadow High School this semester with 7 or fewer students. I think what we have to do when we go back to our zero-based budgeting system is look at every single program and see the importance and the values of them. Special education, health education, music, gifted. These are some of the issues that we have to dive into. We must look at what is most important for our students. I question 2 Chinese courses this semester at Longmeadow High School with 5 or 6 youngsters in it. To me, that is not a priority, but health education would be. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bruslin.
With respect to health education, I think that's an area that we will all agree is the most important area for our students. One of the issues raised here is with respect to classes under 9 and under, and you also have to understand that some of these classes are continuation of classes that have started the second half of a course that may have begun last year. So we have a commitment, at least through the next year, to continue those types of programs. When you are dealing with various courses that you must reduce or eliminate altogether, you have to take a look at each one of them and make the hard determinations of which ones have to go. Certain courses will have to go in their entirety. There are other courses, such as perhaps the health education, which will be taught in one manner or another and will not be gone entirely. These are the choices you have to make. If there's some way to teach it through the physical education program, it is not lost to the students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruslin. And Mrs. Colleton.
Well, I'm surprised to hear both the incumbents bemoan the loss of health education in their proposed budgeting approach, but you have to understand that was their choice. That's their proposal for how we should handle any shortfall. They're going to keep Jewelry 1 and Jewelry 2 at the high school. They're going to keep photography up at the high school. They're going to keep those other courses, and they're going to cut health education. I think it is incumbent on the school committee to look at the benefit of the entire student body in this school district and make, as Mr. Bruslin says, the hard choices. Their choices, and they've got a proposal, and it lists course by course, is to drop music in the elementary grades, is to drop health education. Those are bad choices. It wasn't just 7 courses, Rich, at the last school meeting. Your number is right for under 7, but they sat without discussion and approved 24 courses of under 9 students for the second semester without discussion.
Thank you very much. The next question will come from Mr. Turner. And would you address that question to Mr. Tariff?
Mr. Tariff, the school committee and those who follow its actions have been immersed in detailed figuring for the fiscal 1990 budget for months now. Stepping back from all these details and looking at the situation from a distance, how did the school department and the town get into this hole? Was it a lack of planning by town officials or poor planning, or was it inevitable under Proposition 2.5?
I think it's a combination for it. I think there are 2 issues here. One, we've seen poor planning in past years with the way our buildings have been kept. There should have been bonding issues in past years. We should have had greater building improvement. I also feel that the 2.5 should have been recognized as something that we have to do, and we should have planned on dealing with some of those issues even last year and the year before. what we have to do is communicate with the town about the common problems that both Longmeadow has and every other town and city in this state. The planning and goals of the school committee should be reevaluated. We have to look at our space, our future plans, our enrollment, not just what our statistics say from census figures.
Thank you very much. And the next answer will come from Mr. Bruslin.
Well, certainly Proposition 2.5 is a major part of the problem that we have been faced with over the year. Prior to 2.5, we had the 4% cap, which was the beginning of a different approach to town finances. With 2.5, as we all know, we are limited to 102.5% of the amount of the money that we had raised in the year before. With the necessity, we believe, of giving people a decent wage, of having specific programs for the students, we found that it's necessary to increase the budget each year. You can't, with giving raises. We've also reduced faculty and staff over a period of years. So it becomes a problem when you can only raise a certain amount of money every year and you're limited by law. So I think that the committee has dealt very strongly with these issues. We've closed schools, and there was a lot of controversy over that. But the truth of the matter is, that was a way and manner of saving the town a lot of money.
Thank you, Mr. Bruslin. Mrs. Colleton.
Yes, I think there's several reasons we find ourselves in the fix that we're in. One is a lack of long-range planning. Certainly, we need to have an overall plan, and I think the building issue is indeed an example of the kind of responses the school committee has made. I think 5 years ago we made a mistake when we closed the Converse school, and I think at that time the representations were made that the 5th grade would never go up to the middle school and the quality of education would not suffer. We find 5, 6 years later, there's 28 kids, 29 kids in the classes in the 6th grade at the Williams Middle School and over at Glenbrook. It has suffered. Those are poor judgments. Now, as we look again, for example, at the building situation, what do we find? We're going to focus and propose $6 to $9 million on one building rather than coming up with a district-wide plan for all 6 buildings, which for much less money would bring all 6 buildings into the 1990s. We can't afford many more piecemeal, narrow decisions.
Thank you very much. And the next question will be answered by Mrs. Kittredge.
I would say that the financial problems that we're facing now are due in good part to Proposition 2.5, and we've responded to it ever since it was passed in 1981. We've made quite a few cuts, and maybe people don't realize what some of them are. Our school population has dropped 27% in the last 10 years. Our teachers' population has dropped 21%. We've dropped 33% building administrators and nearly 17% central office administrators. All of these to deal with declining enrollment and to put our money to better use because of Proposition 2.5. We've also deferred maintenance because it's something that it's easy to put off, and we kept the programs in the classrooms and we kept classes small to keep up the quality of education. Unfortunately, it's something that we cannot do any longer.
Thank you very much. And the next question will be from Ms. Tippo. And would you ask that question, please, to Mr. Did I make an error?
No.
Okay, to Mr. Bruslin.
Mr. Bruslin, as was just mentioned, there were some residents that have expressed concern over the $40,000 spent on that modular classroom for Williams Middle School. And do you believe that sources other than the annual census reports should be used to predict the future?
Well, we've gone through this time and again over the years. When we first talked in the mid to late 70s with respect to class sizes and what was going to happen with buildings, we did a $4,500 study by NESDEC to come up with figures. And it turned out at that time that when we got between that and actuality was a great disparity in their figures. Many times throughout the years that we have looked at figures, we find that they are not reliable. It is it is a hard question to answer in terms of the census. Do you do statistical studies? Quite frankly, I don't have much faith in the reliability of many of these, and our statistics with regard to the census is probably as good as anybody else's.
Thank you. Your response, Mrs. Colleton.
Yes, well, I think the point, though, is that you have to engage in overall planning for the entire school district. You have to look at a plan that will not just piecemeal address one problem that's developed. You've got to have programs and alternatives openly and frequently discussed. As you know, 3 years ago, they assigned a committee to study the renovation of Center. There's never been a consideration of other alternatives. That committee has a wealth of information about other possibilities that are out there. There has never been any sort of discussion. There should be a building evening with the school committee where we have discussion with the library group, other groups, and come up with an overall plan. Without doing that kind of thing, with simply presenting at the town meeting one alternative, architect fee or no architect fee, you haven't had open discussion of alternatives, and it's that process that has to be instituted for us to make good judgments in this town.
Your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Kittredge.
As far as the modular building at Williams Middle School goes, it's being paid for out of the tuition rotating fund, so it actually isn't costing the taxpayers any money. As far as studying the enrollment projections for the future, Mary Ann Sedrin, the assistant to the superintendent, is working on her doctorate at UMass and has done a very exhaustive study on projections for enrollments for the next 10 years. She's working with Jim Wilson of the Miser program, and they've used the enrollments from the last 5 or 6 years to project what will happen in the future, whereas previous to that, we would look at enrollments over the last 10 or 15 years, and in this case, where we've been looking at a decline since about 1979 or 80, and looking at enrollment figures for the last 10, 15 years would not be accurate, but looking at them for the last 4 or 5 years, where there have been little blips in the system, would be much more accurate.
Thank you. And Mr. Tariff, in answer to that question.
Thank you. I just have to respond to one comment that Mrs. Kittredge just made, and that was I'm happy that $40,000 is not costing the taxpayers money, but I think we could spend that $40,000 on textbooks, on paper supplies, on furniture, on teaching equipment, science programs, or maybe even doors on the bathrooms at the high school. We have real concerns about the lack of planning that the school committee has done in reference to the building. Three years ago, when the 5th grades were moved from the elementary schools, the town could have received state reimbursement on putting brick and mortar classrooms onto the elementary schools. That could have existed, that could have happened. But instead they decided to move the youngsters to the 5th grade, to the middle schools, and without furniture, without proper planning, and without enough space. And then they had to get the portables.
Thank you. Our next round of questioning will begin with Mrs. Kittredge, and Ms. Tippo, would you like to ask that question?
Mrs. Kittredge, at a recent meeting that I was at with the area superintendents, a lot of the superintendents had concerns about local and state cutbacks. And a few of the superintendents even mentioned parents pulling their children out of the schools and putting them into private schools. And I'd like to ask all of you what your thoughts are on how you would keep the Longmeadow students in the Longmeadow public schools.
There's always a few people who decide to send their children to private school at various stages, often 9th grade, sometimes 10th and 11th grade. We've done exit studies on these children over the last years, and it turns out that many of the children who go to private schools have parents who also went to private school. People leaving their children in the public schools are usually public school products. I would do, the one way that we would keep children in public schools is to keep the class sizes small, as they are for a public school system, because that's the best possible benefit for all the kids in the system, not just the kids who are taken care of by state law under Chapter 766 or their special needs, and that's only 13% of the school population, but the vast majority of the average children who sometimes fall through the cracks, or the special, or the or the gifted children who people often say, they'll get it, they're fast, they'll be fine. Keeping class sizes small would make this a more enticing school system and would keep kids here.
Thank you, Mrs. Kittredge. Mr. Tariff, will you address that question?
When my family moved to Longmeadow in 1963, we moved here for a quality educational program. I moved to Longmeadow in 1963 as a 7th grader. I feel the Longmeadow schools were outstanding. I have questions now if they are as outstanding as they were. I'm almost wondering if we're just operating on our past laurels. I think we have to reevaluate our quality of our schools. We have to look at the total school, the programs. What we have to do is improve the publicity about our schools. What we're reading in the press continually now with the cuts and the program cuts is having a negative impact on the real estate values in our community, and it's not attracting people to move in Longmeadow. And we're going to see our houses depreciate if the publicity about our schools continues.
Thank you. Mr. Brusen, will you address that question?
I served for 6 years on this committee with an outstanding committeeman by the name of Stan Kuziak. And Stanley used to say one thing that people don't quite understand, and that we are not a private school system. People expect a great deal more than a public school system can produce for the dollars that we have available to produce it. Certainly we do an outstanding job, I believe, with the available funds that we have. We do maintain low class sizes. In the years that I've been on the committee, that has been a very, very strong point with the committee over the years, to get those class sizes down, to get class sizes, excuse me, to get those class sizes down requires a larger staff, obviously, and it costs money. But I think the people who come to this community still realize and know that we do produce a system that has children, that 90% of them go on to higher education and have outstanding students. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mrs. Colleton.
Yes, I think the reason, though, that people and the superintendents are concerned that the children might be sent to private school isn't so much because their parents went to private school, is a concern of the decrease in quality of the Longmeadow school system. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that we had an 18-to-1 student ratio. Compare that now at the Williams Middle School and at Glenbrook with class sizes of 28-to-1. True, there's many high school courses 9 and under, but I'm talking about the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students, not just the few that take those specialty courses. Secondly, it wasn't too long ago that we paid the highest salary, second highest salary in the Commonwealth to the principal of the Longmeadow High School, second highest in the Commonwealth. The whole Commonwealth has been under 2.5, and we now pay our principal in the lower 40th percentile. As a result, as they've lackadaisically approached their search for a new high school principal, we have only 30 applicants, and it's March, and our current principal is retiring in June.
Thank you very much. Our last round of questioning will begin with Mr. Tariff, and Mr. Turner will ask the first question, or the last question.
Yes, this question goes back to the center school issue, but there's so much money involved, I think it's worth talking about again. Do you feel that the renovation of center school has more priority town-wide than a renovation or rebuilding of the town yard and a renovation of Storrs Library?
That's a difficult question, Ford. There are many priorities in each one of those issues within the library, within the town yard, and within center school. What I think the town's going to have to do is they have to look at all the needs, from asbestos removal to the building of the town yard, to the library, and to the center school, and develop a town-wide building committee for all of these projects. We must now plan for the future. We have to look at the next decade and what are we going to offer our children in this town. It really concerns me that there are so many major projects in this town and that so many are coming up now as almost crisis situations. We've done the Band-Aid approach in Longmeadow for many, many years, and it's time for a change.
Thank you. Mr. Brusen, your answer.
Thank you. It's certainly a fact that everyone has their own priorities with respect to those projects. We, however, on the school committee certainly look at a building that is in excess of 60 years of age. that needs work, that over the past number of years we have taken money from maintenance for all our buildings and used it for supplies, for textbooks, salaries, and the like. And that certainly hasn't helped the situation. But that aside, certainly a building that is over 60 years of age, two separate buildings, by the way, certainly with the number of students that are there, if you go through the buildings, you will understand what the needs are. And we, as a responsibility to the students of this town, take that as our highest priority.
Thank you. Mrs. Colleton.
Yes, I find in the center school renovation project an incalcitrance and a lack of willingness on the part of the school committee to go back on what may have been poor decisions a few years ago. After all, it is the same people involved. And the problem with this is that the town will support education. They'll give it all the money it really truly needs, but you've got to have leadership and good planning by the school committee to bring these issues. I don't think asking the town to pay $8 million to renovate a 60-year-old building is sensible. I think asking the town with a town-wide program for all 6 schools to do appropriate renovations would be appropriate and would pass. But it's a lack of that kind of development of plans by the school committee that is going to leave us without any building improvement in this district, and it's a shame.
Thank you. And Mrs. Kittredge.
Discussions of the needs of center school began many, many years ago, and we first discussed forming a center school study committee at least 3 years ago. When it was first formed, and before it was formed, if you've done your research, all of the other alternatives for possibilities were examined and included in the decision to go on look and form a center school building committee was the fact that schools are eligible for SBAB, School Building Assistance Bureau funding. And up until last year, Longmeadow was on the list available for 65% reimbursement. But whenever you get state money, you get all kinds of conditions attached to it. And the state said, if a city or town has a building that is renovatable, they will not reimburse 1 cent if you choose a different site and choose to build a new building anyway. Those were the conditions 2 years ago when the Center School Study Committee was formed. The conditions now may possibly have changed because of state funding.
Thank you very much. That concludes this part of our school committee presentation. I'd like to thank the reporters for their interesting questions this evening. And we'll now give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions of the candidates of the school committee. During this segment of our program, the candidates have chosen to reverse or to change the order that they will speak in, and the first question will be answered by Mrs. Kittredge, then Mr. Tariff, Mr. Bruslin, and Mrs. Colleton for the first round. Do we have some questions from the audience? If you'd like to ask a question, please step up to the microphones and address your first question. Go right ahead. You'll have 30 seconds to ask your question, and each candidate will respond with a 1-minute answer.
Right.
Question.
The federal government at one time in the last couple of years suggested a voucher system, which in a parochial supported school area would be very, very helpful, particularly in our town to Catholic parents. The superintendent of schools says that we have too many classrooms, but unfortunately they're not in the right place. If we were to adopt the governor's suggestion of open enrollment, would you support either one or both of these as a potential, first of all, for more income for students coming in from Springfield, and secondly, a little bit of help for Catholic parents who support both a parochial and a private school system?
Mrs. Kittredge, your response.
It's been frustrating enough to try and answer the other questions in 1 minute, but vouchers and the governor's plan and all of that in 1 minute.
Give it a shot.
Well, the governor's plan doesn't look like it's going to be going anywhere. So until the governor gets that plan off the ground, I think I'll just say, let's see what the plan really turns out to be. I don't think it's going to amount to anything. There's 2 different kinds of voucher systems. One is for college students and one is for high school students. I assume you're talking about public school students, because my feelings about vouchers for college students is very different. I think parents need relief when private colleges are $18,000 and $20,000 a year. If you choose to live in a community, I think part of living in a community is supporting the public school system. When you were in school, a generation ahead of you supported public schools, and now it's our turn to support the schools for the children that are coming up. So I believe everybody should pay taxes towards the public schools.
Thank you. Mr. Tariff, will you answer that question?
In reference to the voucher system, first of all, in many ways we do provide in the programs for private schools within the community already. If we look at the Special Education Law 766, we have to provide special education for youngsters within the town and within the state and within the country. If you look at the federal law of 94-142, we are providing these type of programs at this point. The other thing you have to realize is that people choose these institutions by their choice. It's their decision. I do feel that special needs type of programs is an obligation of the community and the state and the federal government to provide, but I don't feel the community should provide it. In reference to tuition, we are doing that in town at this point. Just at the last school committee meeting, the school committee accepted a tuition student for special education. So the town is doing that already.
Thank you. Mr. Bruslin, your response.
Yes, I don't support the open enrollment plan. With respect to vouchers, neither do I in that regard. I think that you make choices. Everybody has choices that they have to make. And if the choice is to go to a private school, that's your choice. If you choose to go to public school, it's here and it's available for you.
Thank you. Mrs. Colleton, do you have a response?
Yes, well, I agree with you, Dick. I don't support an open enrollment situation nor the voucher situation. But I do think that there are some exchanges with other areas such as special education where we could save an awful lot of money. You know, if we were to fully join the collaborative area and exchange different groups of students, very limited numbers here, I'm talking 1 or 2 classes, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars could be saved. It's something that under the current budget restraints, we've got to take the time to investigate, and we've got to look at it. You know, they never do spend any time on the special education budget here. It's $1.8 million. I've been chairman of special education parents group throughout the district for the last 2 years. Twice this year, we've asked the school committee to audit special education to reduce costs and improve the in-district setting. Twice, they have refused to take the time or the effort to address that $1.8 million of budget money.
Thank you, Mrs. Colleton. We have another question from the audience.
Yes, I have a question that should be answered differently by the incumbents and the new candidates, and that's with regard to the moving the 5th graders into the middle schools. I have yet to hear anybody on the existing school committee say that they made a mistake in that, and basically I'd like you to tell me, was it right? And should we have done it, or in retrospect, is it a mistake that needs to be fixed as a result of what's happened?
Mrs. Colleton, you will begin in round 2.
Thank you. No, I think it was a mistake, an unplanned for happening based on our poor planning. One of the things in the building proposal that if alternatives were to be considered might be, we could add an addition to both Blueberry and Wolf Swamp, a $1 million addition, a multi-purpose room for computers, those kinds of things, clear up a couple of classrooms in both those buildings and move the 5th grade back. There's an ongoing cost right now to having these temporary buildings, and as you may know, additional temporary buildings are needed at both Glenbrook and at Williams to aid in the class sizes that they have and to aid in the writing class and computers and other areas. So there's a need for even more temporary buildings out the back door there. I think we should consider other overall building proposals that would remove the 5th grade. I think the principals and the teachers have done a marvelous job, but I'm not in favor of that overall kind of a structure. I think the 5th graders should be in the elementary school.
Mr. Bruslin.
My favorite question. I've been here 15 years and I haven't been afraid to take the heat. And I'll take the heat for closing schools, 2 elementary schools, and at that time we never promised anybody that 5th graders would not be in the middle school. And I will tell you that as a parent of a 5th grader at Williams Middle School. And I find no problem with 5th graders being there. You know, they're there with the 8th grade students that everybody was afraid of, but they're not afraid to leave their 5th grader on a Saturday night with a 8th grade babysitter. you have to go back and look at that school closing issue, and you talk about a modular school, a modular classroom, certainly a lot less expensive than 2 buildings to maintain in town, with principals, with heat, and all the assorted costs that would have gone with it. It was the right decision to close those buildings. It was the right decision to put the 5th graders in the middle school. I'll stand by that decision any day.
Thank you. Mrs. Kittredge, your response.
The 5th graders didn't have to be moved. There were other alternatives, but the alternatives were huge class sizes. When we looked at the possible class sizes, we decided that it would be better to have smaller class sizes for everybody, to have more room for special services. Special education has just grown and grown. The need for resource rooms and tutoring areas has grown tremendously. Special education, which, while it's very good for our school system, really has the potential for becoming the black hole that's going to swallow up the rest of the system. But anyway, back to 5th graders. The bottom line is, in the 2 years that 5th graders have been in middle school, there have been no complaints, not one complaint from a parent, not one problem that a student has had. The teachers are happy, the administrators are happy. The only people that seem to worry about it are people that have young children who have not yet reached middle school age. But don't worry, once they get there, they'll really like it and it'll really be okay.
Thank you. Mr. Tariff, your response to that.
I deal with 950 middle school youngsters on a daily basis, so I'm very experienced with the middle school concept. Research does show that middle school is a 6, 7, 8 program. We also know that the town could have received 65% reimbursement when they did consider moving the 5th grades several years ago. If you multiply that times possibly 6 5th grades that we had in this town, we're talking somewhere approximately $150,000 that we could have put up real brick and mortar classrooms onto the buildings. It was about $100,000 per classroom according to the business manager of the Longmeadow schools. Yes, I feel we did make a mistake. Yes, I do feel we made mistakes closing the schools, and we have to reevaluate what we're going to do in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question, please.
I wonder if the candidates could talk about the qualities you're looking for in choosing a new high school principal.
Thank you. And Mr. Tariff, will you begin?
Circulating through the town in the last few months and talking to many high school parents, both parents and students and staff are excited about having a new high school principal. I would look for somebody that is a leader, someone that knows the high school curriculum, someone that's sensitive to the needs of the community, someone that's going to be a believer of school discipline, someone that's going to be a believer of tighter rules within the school. A school administrator has to be committed 101%. A school administrator has to be sensitive to the needs of children, of the goals, the mission, the objectives of the town. The school administrator has to be the leader. He or she will have to take the faculty and become a united and committed group.
Thank you. The next answer, Mrs. Kittredge.
Okay. Well, one of the subcommittees I serve on is the High School Principal Selection Committee, and as a matter of fact, we just met today and interviewed 5 quarterfinalists. And although there were truly only 30 applicants, the 5 people we interviewed today were great. I'm really excited. And the bottom line is, we really only need 1 principal at the high school. We don't need 80 or 60 or 50. I'm really very happy with the quality of the applicants that we saw today, and I think it's going to be a difficult choice choosing among some very qualified people for that position. Before we even thought about and sent out information for the principal, there was open forums for teachers, administrators, parents, children at the high school were asked what they would like. The superintendent went to the Over 60 Club. There was a great deal of public input in the qualities that the new principal should have, and they were considered in setting up the criteria before we even sent out applications.
Mrs. Colleton.
Yes. I think it is important that the new principal of the high school reflect the qualities that we deem most important in education. And in looking at the current high school, I think the teaching staff is marvelous. The kids are very talented. The parents are supportive. But we need to I think, just slightly add more structure, discipline, regard for rules. And we look at the cuts that the school committee will make if this current school committee stays in. They would cut Peter Crumb's position, the fellow who's been working with the kids who have problems and the drug area and all that. I would never cut him. I think we need a principal who can lead us in raising the self-esteem of the entire student body, who can enforce discipline, and who can work with the very fine staff we have there. I think we will get those qualities.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Bruslin.
Yes, so there's nothing in the list of qualities that Rich had enumerated that I think any of us would quarrel with. Certainly a leader, someone who can gain the respect of the entire community is what we're looking for. And one of the reasons we broadly base the committee is to get community perspective on what kind of individual should be appointed. Certainly the school committee could have taken it entirely on its own and interviewed and said, gee, that's who we want to pick. But I think the fact that we have gone to that extent shows that the committee as a whole is interested in having the community itself have its views reflected in who the next principal is.
Thank you very much. That concludes our time for audience questions. The candidates will now each have 1 minute for some closing remarks, and we'll start with Mr. Bruslin.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the League very much for this opportunity for us to get together. There are a lot of things that I could say, but I think perhaps the most important thing is that I want to thank the people of Longmeadow for the 15 years that they've allowed me to serve you on the school committee. It's really been an interesting and challenging period of time. You know, when I came on the committee, we had just finished a building boom period. We had just finished the large high school addition. The school committee had autonomy with respect to its finances. We had peak enrollments. And then things changed. You know, we had declining enrollment. We had first the 4% tax cap, then Proposition 2.5. I'm not going to get this in 15 seconds, but I would like to say is that the years that I've spent with some great people on the committee. We've worked hard. We've been diligent to the task. We have not always been agreed with, but we have done what we felt it was for the best interests of the students and the community of Longmeadow as a whole. And I thank you and hope for your support.
Thank you. Mrs. Colleton, your closing remarks.
Yes, I care very much for the future of the schools here in Longmeadow. In the last 3 years, I've had children in 4 of the 6 schools, at Blueberry, Wolf Swamp, the high school, and the middle school. I have a first grader who's going to be in this school system for 11 years. And of course, if she doesn't pass first grade reading, it'll be more than 11 years. But in any event, I'm totally committed to this. I spend my time, although I have a background as a research organic chemist and as a Wall Street attorney, for the last 5 or 6 years, I have been full-time homemaker. I spend my time volunteering solely for one thing, the school system. I'm a room mother, I'm a brownie leader, I'm served on the superintendent's long-range planning committee for curriculum for this past year with Liz. I'm totally committed to this school system. I would very much like the opportunity to address the very severe challenges of 2.5. I bring a background of having served on a former school committee in suburban Chicago, having been on the board of directors of my law school for 5 years. I'd love to have the opportunity to address these problems and seek changes to solve them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Kittredge.
I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this forum tonight. I love being on the school committee. I enjoy the challenge, looking for new solutions to the perpetual problems. I'm an incorporator of LEAP because I feel it's important to find non-tax dollars to fund some school programs. I care about the whole school system. I was a student here. I was a math teacher at the high school. I'm a parent in the school system now. And it's reflected in the committees I've served on. The Townwide Safety Committee for elementary students, the Consultation Committee for improving relations with teachers and administrators, the Long-Term Curriculum Planning Committee for future needs, the Lower Pioneer Valley Collaborative for caring for the vocational and special needs students, and the Principal Selection Committee because a good administrator inspires teachers and all students. I care about the whole town. I was chairman of the committee to study the needs of the elderly. I want to be reelected because there's still more to do, and I believe I have the time, energy, creativity, and determination to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Mr. Tariff.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the League for this opportunity. I'm running for the school committee because I would like to see my 3 children have the same type of opportunity that I had in the Longmeadow schools. I feel that my experience as a professional educator for the past 16 years will be of benefit to this community. My experience as an administrator, a classroom teacher, a grant writer, an adult ed regional administrator, all of these will provide, I feel, benefits to this community. It's time for a change within the school committee. I feel I am a worker. I feel I could provide the resources. I feel I have the vigor, and I feel I have the drive. I'd like to thank everyone for this opportunity, and I do hope that I have everyone's support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tariff. I'd like to thank the candidates this evening for being with us, our reporters, Mr. Turner and Ms. Tippo, the audience for coming out tonight when there was a very, very important basketball game. I'd like to thank those of you who watched this evening. The town election is Tuesday, March 14th. Voting will be here at the community center. Please get out and vote for the candidate of your choice. If you don't get out and vote, then you can't make any complaints about what goes on in your town. I'd like to thank Channel 8 also for promoting this candidates forum this evening. That concludes tonight's forum, and we are going back now to the Channel 8 studio. Thank you.
Okay, well, welcome back after the debate, ladies and gentlemen, and we hope you all enjoyed the salient points that were made by the candidates tonight. And as we said in the intro to the debate, we're going to come back, we're going to talk to Joe Curran about Joe's observations actually being there at the debate and see sort of what Joe felt as an overview about the selectmen's race, the planning board's race, and the school committee race. And as I said, I hope when you watch this debate that you didn't watch it because someone said to vote for this person or that person. I hope you watched it because you wanted to judge for your own self who you felt was the best candidate and who responded best to the questions and who you felt projected the type of image that you'd want to represent you as a public official here in Longmeadow. So, Joe, welcome.
Thank you.
Of course, it's your show, so I shouldn't be welcoming you.
That's all right.
But, Joe, you did have a chance to go to the debate. You were actually there live, and you did have a chance to ask a couple questions. And just an overview of the debate itself, how did you think the whole aura of the debate was and how it came off in terms of the perception by the general public?
My reaction to what I was fortunate enough to be sitting listening to was very favorable. And I talked to some people on the way out, and I've had phone conversations since. And the format that we have used is apparently going to, well, it was well received, and there was great encouragement to continue it. I think it's something that we have lacked in the town. It's been difficult to get people to come out and listen. We sincerely hope that many, many people were sitting at home listening. And overall, we need it. And I think we will continue it, and I hope it will be with the cooperation of the League of Women Voters. They did a great job, truly.
Yeah, I was truly impressed. I know when I originally, as I told you, when I was going to be the moderator, I sat with Ann Turnberg, and I was very impressed about the way that they have that time to perfection. They've really got it lined up very effectively, and you know, it allows for good interaction within the candidates, but yet structured limits. And I think that's important. And I think I think they did a good job. And Judy Kelly, I think, did an excellent job as the moderator. And as you said, I think the whole night really came off as very successful and a good interplay of candidates. And and I think, Joe, that this town oftentimes is accused of being very apathetic. And you look at the registered voters here in the town. In the last election, I think we only had 1,800 voters. And what do you see as the turnout for this coming election now that we've got the involvement of the League of Women Voters, we've got this debate, we've given it access on Channel 8? What would you project this, considering we've got a strong race for selectmen, we've got a strong race for planning board, and for the school committee? I mean, and all good candidates. What would you see as the turnout?
I think the major problem that the town faces this year is the wide discussion on the potential for a $10 million capital outlay for the town yard, center school, and for the library. And I think underlying some of that is a strong feeling that people at least should get out there and find out what it's all about. I think that's created a lot of interest this year. For the first time in some while, we find an incumbent selectman pretty vigorously challenged in the primary, our first primary, incidentally, under our nonpartisan voting.
It was actually a general election.
Yes.
Yeah, yep. I mean, okay, yeah, in the primary, right, yep.
Yes.
Right.
I call it a primary. You're right, it isn't, but it's a weeding. To me, it's still a primary because you're weeding out candidates. You're ending up.
The primary responsibility is get out the good ones and put in, or get out the bad ones and put in the good, right?
Hopefully.
Right.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
So I think the selectmen's race is going to be a tight one. I think it's also going to bring out a fair number of voters. Mm-hmm. There's an awful lot of activity going on out there. Some of it is of a rather virulent type, and great many telephone calls being made. I would suppose that we're probably going to hit a maximum vote for a local election this year around. I think we'll probably be as good as we've ever been for a local election.
Yeah, I think in talking to Jackie Marcotte last week, she was saying that, and I asked her over the past several years what was the maximum turnout that we've had, and I think she said it was back in 1978 when Ann Southworth and Cliff Zundell ran against each other for selectmen. I think she said at that time it was upwards of 3,700 voters. Do you think we'll get that many this time?
No, I don't think so. I don't think we'll hit that high. Both Zundell and Southworth were tremendously attractive people. Mm-hmm. A very, very difficult election. Zundell had an enormous backing. And to be challenged by Ann was kind of a shock to a lot of people. But boy, they sure worked hard and they sure got the vote out. No, I don't think we're going to hit that.
Almost a similar shock like we have right now with Arlene being the incumbent and a young, aggressive Matt King, and I think two very qualified people, and it should be interesting to see how that vote goes. Now, let's talk about the debate and Matt and Arlene. Were there any salient points you felt that one brought out that the other didn't, or how did you, what did you see as the highlights of the selectmen discussion?
Well, the format that we used asked each of the participants to address that particular problem, and excepting in the wind-up or summary, there was a little opportunity to branch off into a very general discussion of many, many other problems. So the major issues that came up as a result of questions from the audience had to do with the budgeting problems of the town, where we're going to go this year. And there was some hope expressed by really both candidates that maybe we won't need an override. And each of them talking in terms of studying the problem, working hard to come up with an answer to the problem as they see it, and putting it into a Proposition 2.5 petition form. Now, at that point, Matt talked quite a bit about involving many townspeople. He felt strongly that it's a town of people with many talents. They ought to be involved in the budget discussions that will precede the petition election, or the petition selection, which was scheduled I don't know when. Arlene thought that we were doing that with a steering committee, and Matt took strong exception to that. Matt thought that the steering committee actually was an advocacy committee, and he thought that their goal was to find a basis for marketing what he judges at the moment to be a total commitment to an override. Now,
So in other words, the bottom line is that rather than deciding upon a goal first, you get the people involved to decide what that goal should be, and then work towards that particular goal.
That was the important point that Matt made on the budget problem with respect to 2.5. In the overall, he wanted to emphasize the importance of good deal more cooperation between the selectmen and the school committee. You may recall that in the last couple of months, we've seen emerge from some of the discussions with the selectmen particularly, an objection to the increases that were given to the two top administrators in the school department. The selectmen and the appropriations committee thought that they were excessive and said so. So that developed some schism at that point between the two committees. The other major problem that came up between them and more recently was the asking for funds for architectural fees. Now, both the selectmen and the appropriations committee again objected to appropriations for architectural fees, but at that particular meeting, school committee positions prevailed, and we did appropriate the funds. So there is a lack of cooperation prior to our coming into the town meeting. There ought to be more discussion. There ought to be more input from the people in town, and they ought to do it. If they don't do it, obviously the committee's going to have to work without it. There's too much talent we don't use. We ought to have it.
Right. I think Arlene and Matt came at it from two different directions, but I think both of their ultimate underlying decision-making process was that we've got to have a cooperation in this town, whether it's through a steering committee or whether it's through ad hoc committees. If we don't have the cooperation of the townspeople, then none of the things we strive for are ever going to come to fruition.
I don't think anyone could take exception to that as a good, sound basis approach to the problem, for sure.
Yeah. Now, so I think we're going to see a good race in the selectmen's race. I think
I do too.
You know, we've got the old-time politics against the young, the young up-and-coming politics, and it'll be interesting to see how that race comes out, and I think it'll be very interesting.
Well, there's been a consolidation, even though we're nonpartisan, since the selection process that has produced the two finalists. I'm not going to call it a primary again. The Republicans appeared to have more or less consolidated behind Arlene, many of them, from the listing I see in the newspapers of the supporters that she has. Now, that doesn't mean it's total, because there are certainly members of the Republican Town Committee that are not going to support her. The Democrats, on the other hand, have not come out in an equally forceful fashion for Matt King. And I think they're strictly observing the rules of nonpartisanship. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but that's going to be a factor in the election, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, and it's interesting to see, this being the first time that we're testing nonpartisan, just to see how nonpartisan that definition really actually comes out to be in the long run. Now, as far as the planning board, that was the next one we saw with Joel Dulce and Eileen Sorrentino, and I think, hearing them speak, Eileen was primarily trying to decide upon or trying to give the image of the community coming up with a master plan for our land, and Joel, on the other hand, was coming up with an idea that we should, use our land to the best uses possible. And the thing that I see in both situations is we really don't have that much open land that's available in Longmeadow at this time. And from a planning board perspective, how did you see it in terms of Joel and Eileen Sorrentino?
Well, as I thought it through when they had concluded, I felt that each of them was quite concerned about the best possible use of the open land we have. I don't think inventorying that land is necessary to do all over again. We've done it. We really know where the land is. The major problems, I suppose, on land use lies down in the meadows, what we're going to do with it and how we're going to use it. It appears to be the only possible way to expand whatever we do. Now, there is a great deal of land over in the old Turner Park tract.
But of course you realize that's controlled by us park commissions. We'll never let that go.
Well, do you really control it? Do you control it by town? Well, all right, that's another matter.
We'll talk about that in another
Okay. But there's a vast amount of land over there, and I've wanted to tap that for a long time for senior citizen development. I've given that up because I ain't going to be around when it's done.
Well, we hope that won't be the case. We hope you sure will be.
I thought they came off quite well. It would have been very difficult for me to decide what to do in that particular race. That's one of those races where you feel you'd like to vote for both people.
Sure.
But you can't.
Right. And they're two good candidates, and I think that they come at it from two different directions, but one with a master plan, one with the best use. But again, I think even though they came at it from two different directions, the main point that both of them were trying to make is we don't have that much open space, and we have to come up as a community again with the cooperation of the townspeople to use that in the best possible fashion.
Right.
And whether it be the meadows, whether it be at some point in time one of our open other spaces, the point still means we can't let it go to unnecessary uses. It has to be the best use for the town. Now, I think the hottest, besides the selectmen, which is a hot race, and planning board, probably the hottest race we have at this point is in the school committee. We've got 4 diverse candidates. We've got 2 incumbents, Rich Bruslin and Liz Kittredge, and they're being challenged by 2 newcomers to the political scene, Pat Colleton and Rich Tariff. Now, how did you judge that part of our debate?
There was an extraordinary amount of talent there. As you listened, you couldn't help but be quite favorably impressed by what each said in turn, although they didn't agree. Again, it's one of those very difficult choices one has to make. School committee, of course, is a big spender in town. And they're the people that we all like to find fault with, including me, because indeed they are the big spender. Liz talked about cuts that have been made, and substantial cuts. And I talked to Dr. McCanna before he left office. And Dr. McCanna told me that there has never been a program cut in Longmeadow because of Proposition 2.5. Very interesting statement to make. Dr. McGarry says that we have too many classrooms, but we have them in the wrong place. And yet here we are looking at a very substantial rehab program at the center school, which will not produce, on paper at least, 1 additional seat for 1 more pupil. Apparently, we're committed to 350 pupils. It's going to be very difficult to get the state to look favorably at that kind of a program. And that created a great deal of discussion among the parties there. The Colleton talked about problems that she sees with special ed, and she's a strong advocate of enlarging and improving the special ed program. She had some very important and very specific points to make. Dick Bruslin is always a very comfortable fellow to listen to because he has been around for a long time, been on the school committee for 15 years. He's a thoroughly committed man. He believes strongly in what he has done and has strong convictions about the propriety of what he's done. He says he hopes that we don't have to go override. He says, however, if we do go override, we ought to go on town-wide budget cuts rather than school committee proposals. And
let me interrupt. Let me ask you a question about that, Joe. Do you think that is in terms of if we do go for an override and say there is a deficiency in the school committee, that the other town offices or town leaders should have to, also suffer as a result of that? I mean, I agree. Spreading the responsibility around is good because this is a town we're all in it together. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel very strongly about that. In 1986, we came in with a level-funded town budget with the exception of the school committee. And at that point in time, the school committee was pushed into a position pretty much by the appropriations committee where they were going to have to go to the town and ask for increases in the school budget alone. After a fair amount of discussion, the school committee put what I thought was a pretty direct threat on the table. They told the appropriations committee that if they were forced into that kind of a position, they would go to the town meeting with a total town budget of their own construction. And that created some real problems for a while there. I think they would not have carried through on that threat. I wish they had. It would have been one of the most interesting town meetings we've ever had.
Yeah, to say the least.
It didn't work. Well, we did something at that time that I thought was the shabbiest thing I've ever seen done in town. The Appropriations Committee, under pressure from the school committee, revised the budget. And they took enough from every other town department, an important enough amount of money, so they were able to identify specific areas that would have to go if the override was not approved. Now, those monies they in turn gave to the school committee. So the school committee went into the override looking pretty good, very candidly. And I think if they repeat that, if that's something they're going to try once more, it could be the one thing that will absolutely defeat an override. But they may do that. You know, when we went into the override the last time around, after the override was approved, Lou Allen at a selectman meeting talked about $400,000 we had found. Now that's an expression that's been used in the selectman's office a couple of times about finding money. Well, when Lou Allen made that remark, I thought Ann Southworth was going to have a bad evening. And I remember her saying, I don't know what the townspeople will think of us. How are we going to go to them and tell them we found another $400,000? And no, if we do that, we're in trouble. Which, well, I don't know whether that answers the question or not, but you gave me an opportunity. I hated to pass that one up. And we didn't even talk about that.
Right. No, I think, and like you said, Dick Brusen he's been on the school committee now 15 years, and so, I think Dick made some good points. I think, Liz and Pat, and what about and Rich Tariff? What was your impression about Rich's presentation?
Tariff brings a very, very professional overview to school problems, and he does it and because it's totally professionalized, it's one that you have to respect. He really knows what he's talking about. He understands, well, he ought to, in fairness. He's an active educator. He has hands-on experience. Of course, it's a state, Connecticut is a state that strongly supports education. And the more dollars that goes into education by the state, of course, means a lesser dollar amount that you have to raise on property taxes locally. And so he really had I thought he presented some really good proposals in terms of how committees ought to work together and cooperate. And I thought he had, anyway, I thought he was quite a professional fellow.
Right. Well, like we said, though, I think the school committee is going to be a really interesting race. I think it's going to be a close race because you've got two incumbents, Dick Bruce and Liz Kittredge. They have been on the school committee, Dick for 15 years, and they've got a proven track record. And then you have two challengers who are very professional, who have presented and have addressed issues and stood behind their position. So it's going to be a good counterbalance between, again, the people in office and the people that are seeking those offices. So I think we're in for a very interesting general election
this is going to be
on March 14th at the community hall.
You're going to be down there carrying a sign?
Oh, I hope to. Won't say on air whose sign I'm going to be carrying, but we all have certain people that we that are friends, and of course we want to support our friends as much as possible. So
I think I'm going to be there too. You'll bring the coffee and I'll bring the donuts.
Sounds good to me. Well, Joe, I want to thank you for, as usual, your astute insight into the politics of Longmeadow and the candidates that are seeking the office of Selectman, Planning Board, and the school committee. So this is Tom Foster, along with Joe Curran, thanking you for watching. I want to again thank the League of Women Voters for putting on this great debate this evening. I want to thank Judy Kelly for the great job that she did. Also, Channel 8 in cooperation with Connecticut Valley Productions and Dwight Sturdivant. Thanking you all for watching. We hope to see you again on another Talk of the Town.